Staten Island? Says that it's about to start. It hasn't started on YouTube yet. Maybe it just takes a second. Anyway, this is Gaby, Staten Island, and I'm here with my regular co-host Notsodog. We've also got Dominic Cordova. Is that how you pronounce your name? Corva. And then Caleb Chen. And we're super excited about doing this live with you guys here today. I just want to check out why we are not live on YouTube yet, even though it says that we are live here. So just give me a second. You guys can just talk for a second, introduce yourselves.
I've talked for enough.
There we
I
go.
think anybody that might be watching probably is somewhat familiar with me, I suppose.
Okay, we are live, so I can do an introduction, and then you guys can take it from there. Yeah. So Caleb contacted me, I think like a week ago, and told me about this study that him and Dominic are doing. And when he invited me, I mean, I can't tell you how honored I am. This is the first time I've ever been involved in any type of university study. So yeah, super excited about this. I want to see if I can get the chat up here real fast.
One thing I would like to say,
go ahead,
is that one thing I've always thought about, and I don't know if most people know this, but because cannabis was a Schedule 1 or is a Schedule 1 substance, for a long time, in order to study any kind of Schedule 1 substance, you need the DEA's permission, right? And so what they would do is, like, for instance, if you were at the university and you wrote and asking for permission and you were looking to say that like cannabis gives you testicular cancer or something horrible, they would say, yes, you can study that. If you wanted to say, I think it relieves stress, or I want to do something positive, they would say no, because what they were looking for was studies that buttressed their idea that it's this extremely harmful thing, right? And so as a result of that, people call it bro science or whatever, but cannabis for a long time was sort of regulated to observational science. And even though it was like an important crop, in my opinion, most crops out there have sort of some sort of farmer university like bond, whether it's the University of Iowa or UC Davis or what have you. There are PhDs and there are guys in universities and there are teams that are working on with farmers, helping to improve crops, whether it be pest resistance or yield or drought, go on down the list. And so cannabis has been sort of excluded from that for a long time, and it's just now starting to get worked on. So it's super exciting to have like those two sides, essentially, the farming, the growing side, the farming side of it, meet with the university side. Everything from, like I said before, figuring out how to grow it better, or how to adapt it to climate, to its history, to its so on and so forth. And because of its illegality for a long time, most of its history and most of its tales are sort of oral, and those will fade over time, as things come on. And so I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there that
That's totally accurate. And let me put it in a little bit more of a context, which is that before the late 70s, there was funding for a broad range of ways to study cannabis, and you still needed permission from the government, but the government was relatively open about it, even if the government didn't like cannabis. Like there were, like the American Anthropological Association actually funded a huge like cultural history study. Cannabis and Culture is the name of the collected book, and it was like 50 chapters. I don't know how many presenters in 1973 at the American Anthropology meetings. It was funded by the government, right? But as you hit basically, so 71 is the scheduling, the recriminalization of cannabis at the federal level. But all this stuff kind of takes time, and by the end of the 70s, like the professors who would, study cannabis and exercise and sport were no longer doing that. They weren't applying for grants to do so because they weren't going to get it, whatever else. And it really all flowed through the University of Mississippi for quite some time until like 2018-ish. There were a few other universities that got DEA permission and so forth. But this side of things, it's not federal funding, is one of the unique things about this kind of study. It is state funding, and it is, made possible by the onset of legalization, which I always like to say legalization with, not after prohibition. But it's one of the little small ways in which things opened up, was the funding and ability to do stuff like this. And this leans heavily on the cultural part of agriculture, right? What we're doing here in terms of interviews. The social sciences are a bit different from the ag sciences. Yeah, 79, that's great.
By the way, that's Wolf.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Wolf. You keep correcting me.
You will.
I
You
know.
will.
I know. That's great. I'm so glad you're with us. The general picture that you're describing is absolutely the case. And then also it's like the ag school science and research. That has kind of resumed. I guess Cornell is kind of one of the central places for that, for hemp, technically speaking, although Caleb's been there, it ain't just hemp. And so the landscape for being able to do these things has opened up, basically. And so here we are. And I'm a geographer. Yeah.
Let me read this. Let me read this description that Caleb sent me, just to get things started, and then we'll just cut loose. I do have something I want to say after this, but I'll be as brief as Gaby can be. People and Their Plants, a community-driven study, is a DCC-funded, community-engaged research project involving Cal Poly Humboldt, UC Berkeley, Origins Council, the United Court Alliance, Leafworks, and Canndor Herbarium. Dr. Dominic Corva is the principal investigator, Cal Poly Humboldt, and his subscope in this project is to conduct 100 ethnographic interviews and tell stories about California's cannabis in a geographic context during the modern drug war of 1971 to 2016. One will be the global context while being respectful of the places cannabis came to California from. The second one will be about places cannabis was stewarded and movements therein within California. Dominic will interview people about their life histories in these places and stories about building blocks moving between places. These two stories will be published as peer-reviewed and open access articles. This work places these stories on the record as reference material. It will tell the story of the human-plant relationship from the perspective of people who love the plants as opposed to from the cops, which is what it's mostly currently on record. And so what I want to say is when Caleb contacted me and asked me to do this, first of all, I was like, this is exactly what we do. Like, we want people to tell their stories and document their stories. And this was before we went live. I think Notsodog was talking about how, or it might have been at the beginning of this, how most of the stuff is recorded memory and how, that's fading and we're losing stuff. And one of my missions in life now is to not only document my story, but also to give people a place to document their story. So when Caleb contacted me, I was like, and he sent me a link, and please share the link so I can share it in the chat that you sent me, Caleb. But basically, he sent me a link telling me what was it? It was a live that you guys did, or?
It was a webinar.
It was a webinar.
Yeah.
And, I was just maybe a few minutes into it, and I said, oh my God, this is just amazing and something that I absolutely want to be part of. I've never been part of a college study, and having my story documented for this study, it's a tremendous honor. Dominic and Caleb, I want to thank you. at first, I mean, I agreed immediately to do it. I was like, they want me to do this, I'm doing it. But then I was thinking about it for the last week, and I was like, man, am I really qualified to be part of this story? Like, I mean, I was trying to, because to be honest with you, I don't 100% understand what I just read. When we're talking about
Yeah.
ethnographic
Ethnographic.
ethnographic interviews and like how cannabis has moved. And then I realized, hey, you know what? I was part of the scene and the culture in this time. And, I opened up a grow store. It was still illegal to grow cannabis. And yeah, so, with a little time, I said, hey, you know what? Maybe I can contribute some good things to this story. And, with that, I'd like to say again, thank you, Dominic and Caleb, for inviting me to do this. Thank you for letting me invite my closest friend, Notsodog, to do it with me because he's part of my story. And, so with that, what we're going to do here today is Dominic and Caleb are going to interview me and Notsodog for this project. And, we're going to run loose with it, I'm sure. And, with that, thank you guys very much. I'm going to be consuming some Chem 91, which I have very little of. This was gifted to me by these guys over at Sky High Select. And then before we start, I also want to say all my Snodgrass glass burned in the fires in 2017. And Woody J sent me, this is made by Bob Snodgrass's grandson. It's a little doob holder. And I love it so much. Like the experience of using this, like it's really so beautiful and I'm so grateful. And so I just wanted to start off the show by like thanking Woody J for this. It's just, so anyway, Dominic, I
Yeah.
hope you don't mind if I spark up as you make your
Not at-
introduction and start interviewing me and,
Not at
and
all.
not so dog, but
Yeah.
I'm stoked. Let's
I,
go.
I will probably be joining you in a little bit
Good.
on the sesh side of things.
Hey, you
one
know
thing,
what's cool about this? It's like the first time we're allowed to get high at school,
yeah,
right?
it is, and like it's part of the fact that these are ethnographic interviews. Is that like what that really means is they are stories of human beings and humanity that are being told in conversation between two people who share a culture or share a geography uh, or overlap in some way, shape, or form. So like I am not coming to you as someone who has not been living in this, well, since my 20s, but in particular, like in this, like, since 2010 or so. And so I'm not a stranger. There's an ethics to that when it comes to the research. And there's different terms for it, but really, what doing ethnography means is participating in that life and doing observations and conversations that are going two directions or more. Like this is a focus group basically right now because we got 4 people. If it's 2 people, it's like a one-on-one interview. Focus group has a lot of advantages over the one-on-ones. Shared history comes out. The point about ethnographic interviews also is that they are less structured, so you allow like the questions to emerge in organic conversation, and the organic conversation is possible because you guys share a culture, right?
Right.
So that does include, and Janine and I have discussed this as well. I mean, since we started, I don't think I went into it knowing for sure that this was going to happen, but like the people I'm talking to, it's a sesh to them, and it's a sesh to me, largely speaking as well, where like you are consuming cannabis together and remembering, right? And it's important for that to be, especially now that we don't have any reason to hide this because we're living, a state in which it's legal, that it's okay to be doing this. So in case people are wondering why it's okay to smoke weed at school, is part of the ethnography. It's part of the ethnographic encounter. It's part of, community engaged research in this fashion in the social sciences. Um, so, you know, with that said, what I'll be sparking up in a moment is some Hagalicious from Terry Haggerty
Nice.
um, uh, over in Marin County. And we're going to be doing that. So the other thing too is that what you didn't mention, Gabby, was normally these are recorded and then they're transcribed and like eventually things leak out to the public after people take a look. And so this is not what you asked is why aren't they public? Why don't people want it? Well, because they haven't asked is one of the reasons, and because it becomes a slightly different kind of source once it's done. Like what we are doing is participating in your public forum. So there's no IRB, right? The school can't be responsible for things that get said that might get anybody arrested, and so what it is we're producing essentially an archival resource, which is a public interview that works just as well as a private interview with a transcription, but it isn't connected, by the IRB process, to the research. It's connected by the fact that like we're in this together and basically doing the same exact thing, and producing something that will be transcribed, but is immediately available to the public. And there's something very interesting about that to me, because it helps people like see what happens when we do these things.
The first thing I think we should do before we get too deep, and I want to make sure we do it a number of times in the podcast, is I want to link people to your website so that they can, get more information about what you guys are doing. Are you going to type that in, Caleb?
Caleb's going to type it in.
Caleb's like the show producer today. We have a producer.
He's the producer. He's been the producer for like so much of this work. Let me tell you, like Caleb started out as a graduate student, and he's become a fully, he is my associate. He's my research associate.
He started off as somebody that you just got high with, and now he's your producer. So yeah, legacygenetics.org. So please, everybody, go check out legacygenetics.org.
Yeah, and there are other fun ways to check out as well. UC Berkeley, I did an interview with Laura Herrera a while back. They've got on their webinar site, and then there's also a Haas Church that happened about 6 weeks ago that was pretty cool, and kind of had I did not know we were going to do the full 4 hours, but like it turned into a mega focus group.
Oh, wow. That's a long time to talk.
Well, I get the feeling that this is going to be a long one too.
This could be a long one.
It could be a long one.
I wanted to warn you about that. We go long form here. Our podcasts generally go for 2 to 3 hours.
Yep.
And I just want to make sure that we get a chance to discuss everything that I want my story documented. Yeah. So something that, I should say again, I didn't say it during this podcast, but it's actually funny because Notsodog is here. So Notsodog was doing another podcast, and he would mention me on the podcast, and I wasn't watching it live always. I'd like watch it when it got released, and I'm like, he didn't get this right. And I would be like yelling at my phone because he's like saying that like I hate sativa or I hate haze or he would just be quoting me on different things. And so I did a response video, okay? And my video was titled Response to Notsodog something or other, okay? And I was like, no, you know what? This is how I feel, right? And so the video got an amazing response. And so I'm going to give people a little tip on YouTube, and this is for Dominic and Caleb too. I've already said, the title of your video matters, right? So Notsodog, he's been doing a lot of podcasting. People love his stuff. And so just by mentioning him in the title, I guess what happened was after people watched one of his videos, they watched mine. And so like, right away, my first video is getting all these, and I realized it's like, first of all, Notsodog was podcasting with our friend Crybaby. And to be honest with you, I was a little jealous because and I don't get jealous, you know, but like I wanted to be part of it, and I wanted to tell my stories with Francis, you know, Notsodog. And so I just started like making these videos myself, and I realized I want to document my story. That's what I want to do. I want to document my story. And so to have an opportunity to document my story and have it be part of a university study, I can't tell you how that like makes me blush.
One of the things that I find interesting, like from a historical perspective, right, is that like you think memory is etched in stone when it's really sort of a malleable thing that is affected by a lot of different factors over time. And so people, because most cannabis, like I said before, is oral history, right? Gabby and I talking about something that we did together in 2001 might have different memories.
Yeah.
You know, like I remember talking to my brother and my sister about some memory I have of my mom just hammering us about something, and it's like clear as day for me, and they don't even remember it.
Yeah.
Or when you talk to most people, like whether it's, you know, insert famous strain name here about like the origin story of that, you might get 4 different versions and they don't all line up. And then people will be like, well, who's lying? Right? Well, lying is like an intentional thing. You know, you can misspeak because you misremember. Because I'm not a scientist, but memory to me is not etched in stone. It seems much more malleable and changeable over time than one would think. You know, and so that's one of the difficulties of telling cannabis stories is like a lot of them, people's memories differ on things. Some people it might be like really a formative memory and really stuck in there. Other people it might be more transitory and it might need to be triggered by something, you know, and that sort of adds a little bit to the complexity of it,
So that
right?
clip of you talking about that right there could be shown in a methods class in college as the description for like what the advantages of focus group interviews are.
Okay.
Like literally like that's why. And what like the social context does in terms of reconstructing stories. I want to add that like people often assume that like I'm looking for the true stories of particular things when I'm not at all. I'm looking for the story of the stories,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not looking for catching people in a lie or a mistake. I'm looking for like the landscape of the possible things that happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was trying to get at in the sense of like people's memories differ and they can overlap.
Yeah.
And people are always really quick to be like, well, there's one true story, so someone's changing it intentionally.
Yeah.
Rather than we're human beings that only live so many decades. And when you start to try to remember back decades, well, you know, like there was, for instance, in the 90s, in the pager era, right? I literally had dozens of phone numbers memorized,
Yeah.
in which when it came through on my pager, I knew exactly who it was. I can't think of any of those numbers anymore because my brain just determined they were not useful so long ago, right? That it just got rid of it. It overwrote it, you know, on my hard drive in my brain or something. It's just maybe it's in there somewhere, but it's not. The search query doesn't pop it up anymore. And so your mind is like that. It remembers what's important to you, and it starts to discard or change or maybe archive stuff that it considers not over time. You know, and I mean, I would also say too that like I kind of feel like the mind is sort of like the final frontier in science. Like as far as humans, like we really understand a lot about the body, and we don't understand that much about the mind yet.
No.
You know how it works, consciousness itself. You know, we know more. We're learning more all the time, but there's still a great mystery there, to some degree, from
There
my
always
layman's
will be.
perspective.
And there always will be. And knowing like, you know, being able to take a picture of chemicals in the brain is not the same thing as knowing what consciousness is,
Yeah,
right? Like, and we've gotten really good at like neuroimaging and mapping cells and stuff, but like, there's actually no corresponding understanding of, you know, how that actually works. So yeah.
I mean, one of the things I find really interesting about cannabis, before we get into the history part, is I feel like the other there's only a few drugs out there that Americans have like wide access or experience with, so it gets compared to alcohol in lots of ways. But there's really not that big of a difference. Like alcohol is sort of like tolerance and body weight, and it's like the stages of poisoning that you're in. Like, like light poisoning feels pretty good, heavy poisoning, maybe you vomit, you're not feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
But cannabis seems to have a much wider range of effects on people. Right? Like
Yeah.
it's very like strain dependent. It can make you anxious, it can make you tired, it can make you hungry, it can have this whole host. And the four of us here, if we all happen to have the same strain, some people might smoke all of it and find it enjoyable. Somebody might want to crawl out of their skin, somebody might get nervous or paranoid, somebody might, so I find it really interesting that it seems to have a much wider range of effect on people. And I don't know that we know the why to that yet. We have some ideas, but it seems to me like that in itself is like pretty, like, why do strains affect us so differently?
Yeah, and not the least among the explanations are set and setting. So should we maybe start it off
Yeah,
with these,
go ahead.
set and setting?
We're probably going to interrupt you a bunch, so I hope you can get
That's
used to that.
fantastic. And you guys feel free to do that. So Gaby, I'm going to just start off with the same really basic question that we start with everybody.
Suddenly, I'm getting a little nervous. I'll just say that
No,
right
no,
away,
no,
'cause I'm like, this is serious.
What's your background and how did you come to meet the plant? Like background being like family background, economic background, and geographic background.
So, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, 1970, and moved to Staten Island when I was 2. And so I did most of my growing up on Staten Island. And, when I first started smoking cannabis, because I was in New York, it was almost like weed wasn't the plant. It was just a substance, Like we didn't know about growing weed, and particularly that like anyone could do it, in their backyard or closet. And it's really funny. I encourage everybody to go and look at my other videos, but I have a video with my old friend Stu, and the video is labeled Gaby's Friend Stu Manchu, and he tells the story about when I first smoked weed, and it's really funny, and it's kind of like, for me, I prefer it when Notsodog tells stories about me than when I tell them. It's far more entertaining, but Stu was really drunk, and he told the story about how our friend Mark Sikawa stole herb from his parents, like took it out of his mom's drawer, and I think we probably smoked it out of a tin can or an apple or something like that, because, it didn't have any paraphernalia. And according to Stu, the first time I smoked weed, and it was just on, like my love for weed just grew immensely. And he was always like a drinker. I mean, we were little. His brothers were bartenders, and like he always had all sorts of liquor available to him in the house. And like even from when he was really young, he liked to drink, But like I liked to smoke weed, and it was far more rare, Now, as far as my parents and my family, and I think this is an important part, my parents were from Argentina. And they moved here in the late 60s, I think. Something like that, in the 60s. But they missed the 60s because they were immigrants. And so like they weren't really part of like the scene or the community, even though it was all happening around them. You know what I mean? And so for them, cannabis was like hard drugs. It's kind of the way it is with our government, right?
Yeah, it's also
saying it's Schedule 1,
yeah.
right? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know that the rescheduling is good for us, but saying that cannabis has no medical benefits is clearly not true,
For sure, but they're also coming from Argentina, right?
Right.
And throughout Latin America, the Catholic Church has actually kept weed and highly demonized, right? Wanted to ask real quick, were they political
No,
refugees?
no,
No. Okay.
no. They my uncle managed to make it to the States, and he was able to like get them. They legally immigrated from Argentina. And prior to that, and I don't know how relevant this is to my cannabis history, but on my dad's side, they escaped the Holocaust, and that's what got them to Argentina. And the only two people that survived were my grandma and her sister, and my grandfather and his brother. And at that time, anybody could get into Argentina, right? Like the Nazis were able to go there, and the Jews were able to go there. It was
Yeah.
just like they were
Yeah.
accepting people,
Yeah.
So that's how on my dad's side they ended up in Argentina.
Interesting. What were their occupations?
My grandparents or my parents?
Parents and grandparents.
Okay. My dad was a photographer, okay, and a videographer. And I always tell people that, like, because I'm not handy, I can't fix things. And I tell people my dad never taught me how to use tools. And like the joke is he had three tools in his toolbox. He had a hammer, a screwdriver, and a checkbook. And the checkbook was the one that got used the most to fix things. But he taught me how to take a picture. Like I was his assistant when we did photography and videography, and he built a darkroom in my house and taught me how to develop film and make prints. And so I always say my dad taught me how to take a picture. And this podcast is really low budget, but like I like to take photos. I take a lot of photos of my kids, of concerts, and even though I do it all now with my cell phone, I take it serious. Like when I'm taking a picture or I'm making a video, I take it very serious.
You compose and stuff like a visual artist. Yeah.
My mom was a nutritionist, and like she worked in schools and in nursing homes, and she was really into like living healthy and eating healthy.
Okay.
Like when it wasn't the thing,
Right.
like
It was
in
granola.
yeah,
She was
exactly.
Argentinian granola.
Yeah, she was.
It's a close relative to the hippie. Because the granola stuff was there even like without the hippies. Like,
Except that they
convergent.
thought weed was so bad and drugs were so bad. Like drugs were for people living on the street,
Yeah.
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 And I have told it before, but I'd like to tell you the story about when my parents first found out I smoked weed.
Go
You
ahead.
ready for that? You ready for that one? Yeah. So, my parents didn't know I smoked weed. I'm thinking I'm like, I don't know, 14 years old or 15 years old in high school, and they still don't know I smoke weed. I've been smoking weed for years. And what I used to do is I used to wait for them to go to sleep, and then I'd take my dog for a walk around the block. And I'd smoke a big joint as I walked around the block, like totally carefree. I'm like smoking a fucking giant cigar at like, I'm 15 years old. And so one day, my neighbor, her name's Lila, she says to my mom, "Hey, did you know that every night Gaby walks Gaucho around the block with a big joint in his mouth?" And my mother was horrified because not only was her kid using drugs, like for her it was serious, like my kid's using drugs, but the entire neighborhood knew about it and she didn't.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
like,
the rest of your neighborhood didn't rat on you.
yeah,
Time, right?
like back then, like parents ratting on their kids to other parents about weed, like they actually thought that they were doing the parents a solid.
Yeah.
Like
But not most of your neighbors. Most of your neighbors were actually not like that.
no, my neighbors were like that. That's the thing. Like
Kinda
my
rat-
neighbors weren't smoking
like,
weed. Huh?
right. But nobody was ratting on you until that moment.
Yeah,
Like
that's
for
true.
years
She
you
was
did
the
it.
initial
Yeah.
rat. I'm
Yeah.
sure she did it thinking that she was being a friend to my mom and that like she couldn't
Right.
live with it if she didn't tell her or something like that, you know?
But that's what's interesting is actually that like, why didn't anybody else do it before that? If this went on for years, since what, middle school? Like,
Yeah.
like your neighborhood had your back.
Yeah. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So think about, maybe the atmosphere you're growing up in. Uh, that's pretty cool. Staten Island. Did I interrupt your story? I
No,
just thought that
no. I mean,
really,
like
yeah.
I can keep telling stories, but I want to make sure I leave time for you to ask questions
Well, for
because that.
sure. That's one of them. That's one observation about your urban geography is that like, there might have been more sympathetic weed smokers on that block than you remember. Um,
One thing I might want to say, just because it triggered a memory for me, is my dad's parents grew up in a tiny town in Mississippi, and it was the opposite of that. My grandpa used to say that if he did anything bad, this isn't weed related at all, but anything, by the time he got home, three people had already called his mom and given him versions of the story. And so whenever he was interviewed by his mom or his dad about what had happened, he didn't realize that they had already heard what had happened. And they had a pretty good idea. And they were just trying to see if his story matched up with what they knew.
yeah.
And so, like, Gabby growing up in New York, maybe there was one person.
Right.
In small town Mississippi in the 30s or whatever, it was pretty much everyone
Yeah.
because everyone knew everyone. And, so, um, that's, I don't know, it just made me think of that for some reason.
Yeah.
That
You grew up in a more hardcore anti-weed
Should
life.
we skip over to Natso or should we stay on me? Like, should Natso tell his initial stories or?
Sure.
I mean,
You,
mine is pretty basic. Um, like a lot of Americans, I was born in Chicago, okay, in the mid 70s. And, we were nomadic in the sense that wherever my dad got a job, we lived, you know? And so we bounced around quite a bit. Um, and so, long story short, on that one, we ended up in a number of different places for some years. And then we moved back to Chicago when I was a young teen. And, when you're a teen, you're really looking for acceptance, right? You're looking for some group or some group of friends or girls or whatever it might be. You're looking for acceptance, right?
you're looking
And
for a
because
social context. Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, because I moved a bunch, I didn't really have good friends in the sense that when you move every 3 or 4 years, you don't. It's not like you don't have like people you grew up with that you've just known since you were a little kid or anything like that, right? So when we moved back and I went into a new high school, I was looking for friends, right? And the funny thing about Chicago, I think it's probably similar in other big cities, is like it's the opposite of a tiny town. If they don't know who you are, they generally don't care about you. Like they care about like who they know, and then outside of that, maybe not much. And so I think one of the reasons why I got into weed was almost totally accidental because the people that accepted me and wanted to be friends with me happened to smoke weed in high school, and I wanted to be accepted, you know and you're like after school or whatever. And I mean, the weed at this point was brown Mexican import because that was what a 15-year-old in my era had access to for the most part. And so I essentially smoked weed. I don't want to say to fit in, but it was kind of like the only friends I had. That's what they like to do after school. And so that's sort of how I got into it,
You said
for
that that
lack of a
would be
better term.
bad, but like, it's true. You smoked weed to fit in. That's what it was.
Yeah, I literally because all these people people would be like, now that I'm older, people will hear certain parts of my story and they'll be like, oh my God, that was so cool. And it's like, it's not like I was like, I just had some impeccable taste or I was a curator of whatever. It was more like I stumbled into it, based on social circumstances or what have you, and then realized I liked it, you know? And the interesting thing about weed, and there's good and bad things to this, okay, is that I grew up in the DARE era, right?
Me
Where
too.
they would send police to schools to tell you the horrible dangers of all the substances, and they would pull up in some confiscated drug dealer's sports car and pull out all these different things and show you how bad they were. Well, one of the negative parts about that is that if you're going to tell people that herb is or marijuana is as bad as heroin or cocaine or crack or something, and then some kid tries marijuana and he's like, oh, you're lying.
Yeah.
Maybe you're lying about the rest of it. And, some of those things, they weren't lying. They were actually quite dangerous and you probably shouldn't deal with them. But it wasn't because they lumped them all into one like awful, dangerous category, you know? And one thing I think I should mention too, because if people are listening, it's like a different world. But the era that Gaby and I are talking about is pre-internet, and the internet is the premier. I mean, we're talking on the internet right now, but it's the premier way that people bond and learn things. It's like information moved much slower then, and you learn things from your friend circle, and they might be negative things. Like for instance, a funny joke: when we first started smoking, we used to have these pipes, these metal pipes that had like a resin chamber, and we would take our nicest bud and stick it in the resin chamber because we thought when we smoked it, it would coat that bud in free resin as we smoked. And then at the end, we'd have this amazing coated bud that we could then consume that would be better than all the rest of it, you know? And yeah, apples, like Gaby said, like it was, I mean, in Chicago, there was no paraphernalia shop. In Illinois, there was no paraphernalia shops. There was nowhere to buy a pipe or a water, a bong or anything like that. Even like, um, even like gas stations that might sell loose tobacco and papers to go with that loose tobacco would sometimes get hassled by the cops. So teenagers would figure out apples, how to form a pipe out of aluminum foil with a pen, various different things because access was poor, you know, and all that, and so I mean, yeah, that's kind of like how basically how I got started was just the people who accepted me in high school smoked pot, and
Yeah.
I wanted to be accepted, by somebody, by some group, you know. And so, and then once I tried it, I realized I liked it, and then I realized that it wasn't horrible, and I could essentially accomplish everything in life that I wanted to, you know, and maybe the government wasn't telling me the truth.
About a number of things, right? Uh, yeah, that absolutely is something that we found is that people's earliest experiences with cannabis are often about kind of overcoming isolation
Yeah.
and connecting with other people. And, like often it's mutual, often it's just someone getting adopted into it. And that's something that's very interesting to me culturally about it's like common across space. So like to me, that's something connected definitely to the plant.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
you mentioned the botany of desire earlier,
yeah.
and it's sort of his take on like a plant's eye view of the world, right?
Yep.
And why plants form relationships with people and move around.
Yep.
And so one of the things, when Gaby was talking about podcasting, one of the things that I wanted to do when I was podcasting was a lot of podcasts are sort of like infomercials about a person. They're trying to like sell you some
Brand.
seeds or like why am I interesting or why you should buy my stuff.
Yep.
And I wanted to do a podcast that was sort of like what's the best way to put it? Like normal friends sitting around a couch, sharing a joint or whatever, and
Having a
then
sesh.
talking about stuff community wise, because that's kind of what you were mentioning. is it's like there was a communal aspect to it. You know, you would get high and you would listen to some music, and all of a sudden you'd realize it sounded better. You know, you're like, man, this Pink Floyd album is really, it's like really hitting me deeply, you know, and then you would laugh with your friends and you would tell stories and all that type of stuff. And, you know, there's another book. I mean, he's pretty famous now for like wellness or whatever, but there's this guy, Andrew Weil, and he wrote this book, I think it was called The Natural Mind, right? Where he basically said that, you know, there's an inherent desire in most people to change their consciousness, right? And one of the things he mentioned, like when you're a little kid, most people's experience with changing your consciousness at first is like spinning around in circles until you get dizzy and fall over, or like going on like in the
And you like
playground and
that. You
or
like
going, yeah,
that.
going around on the playground, and there was that like uber dangerous thing that you just spun around as fast as you could, and it was like you had concrete all around it, and you try not to fly off and die, you know. And but that was changing your consciousness, and that was people like that. And so generally speaking, when people encounter something that changes their consciousness, there's something at least a large subset of people that like that and seek
Yeah.
that out. And like whether it's like, you know, they talk about it like adrenaline junkies or people that search out certain kind of experiences. Marijuana was just like a quick way to change your consciousness and to
Yeah.
put you
I,
no
I,
keep
I want to add two things. One is that, like, when you say change your consciousness, like, what I feel like I understand you meaning is playing, basically, playing with your state of mind,
mm-hmm.
and that's also kind of a natural human thing that's necessary. And it's like you can play also with like other living and non-living things. It's not just, you know, human beings. The other part, oh gosh, the other part is there's the play part, and what was my second point? Shit, I said just to put a pin in the other one so I wouldn't forget it. But
There you go.
yeah, there you go. Gabby, what about you in terms of the social, you know, playing with other people and your friendships? Like, were most of
I'm
your
so
friendships?
glad that you asked that because, like, while Francis was telling that, I was just thinking about some friends of mine. And so I started off, I told you about Stu, who was like the first person that I ever partied with. But then there were my friends Scott and Rick. They were brothers. And like, this was when I was 17, I think, or 16, like just getting cars and stuff. And man, my buddy Rick would build igloos in his backyard, you know, and, you know, because we lived on the East Coast, it would snow, right? So when it would snow, he'd build an igloo out of snow and he'd put water on it to like freeze it really good. And then like he would keep on expanding on it and expanding on it and expanding on it. And you know, because as it would snow and he would freeze it and he would just build it all up and stuff, and it would eventually it would become like a multi-room igloo in his backyard that he would get like food dye and color the walls, and there was like a bearskin rug on, I mean, there was candles. It was fucking comfortable, and that's where we used to go out to burn, you know, because like we couldn't smoke in the house. Like he lived with his parents, you know, and like, but like his parents were kind of just like a little bit clueless. So like we would just like go in the backyard, go into the igloo, and have these massive sessions, and then just like go down into his house, into his basement, and just laugh. And you know, him and his brother were amazing musicians, like super incredible. Like specifically, Scott was just like one of the best guitarists. Like he was 16 years old and he could play crazy shit, like from classical guitar to like just like anything. Be like, all right, put this on, and he could just play it. And so like I got really exposed to a lot of music through hanging out with him. And it was something that Notsodog said earlier about how weed makes you hear music differently and appreciate music differently. And so I remember getting high, and he would be playing Andre Segovia on acoustic guitar. You know, he's like a classical guitarist, you know, and he's like playing, you know, finger picking flamenco guitar while I'm super high. And I'm like, you know, and
One thing I
so
just thought of, dude,
go
I don't
ahead.
want to
No,
interrupt
go ahead.
terribly,
Please
but
do.
like
Interrupt.
one of the things I think is kind of cool is when you're young, because cannabis was illegal, right? And I also come from a family that did not smoke. And so as a result of that, getting into cannabis required a certain amount of problem solving. I had to acquire it. I had to stash it. I had to figure out how to consume it without getting grounded or in trouble or having my parents realize what was going on. And so there was a whole source of like puzzles essentially that you had to do. And then, you know, your teachers would get you in trouble, other kids could get you in trouble, your parents would get you in trouble, as Gabby said, your neighbors might get you in trouble. And so you're trying to figure out how how to navigate all that, you know. And then, you know, you'd hear stories from your friends about getting in trouble or getting they caught with something and they got grounded, you know, or this happened or this penalty happened. And so it wasn't just like you experience it on that level, it's more like you experience it from the level of it's like something secret. It's something that's only going to be shared with like your circle of friends or a trusted group. You have to be able to get away with it. You have to figure out, like Gabby said about walking the dog, how can I put myself in a position where I can, like, you know, go catch a buzz for a minute and then get back home and like my mom's not going to smell it on me, you know, or like I'm not going to. And, you know, I'm sure people have tons of stories about both success and failure of that, you know. But it was sort it, you know, it was a clandestine thing, and most people in America, I think, experienced it when they were a kid at some point. You know, like a lot of use starts at teen use, right? And so as a result of that, you're only so mature. You live at your parents. You're trying to figure it out. Like as Gabby mentioned, one of my buddies that got me into it, the reason he got me into it was because, you know, most kids know what's going on in their parents' house. His dad had a stash. And I don't know, you guys probably remember, a really common way that people stashed it was back in the day where there was film, right? There would be those film canisters that
Yep.
were black and had the gray top and snapped on, you know, and
With
that's what people
poisonous
would
chemicals inside.
and people would keep their film in that or whatever to make sure it didn't get exposed to light before it got developed. And that was a lot of early people's like little container.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be their little stash or whatever. And so one of my friends, my friend Ryan, he discovered in his dad's room you know, a few of those that had some stash in it, and this was exciting,
Nice.
you know. And so, you know, it's like I said, pre-internet and stuff like that. Like most of what you heard was just what you heard. Like I don't know a different way to describe it, but it was like it wasn't like with your friends that are 15 or 16, they're like experts. It was more like there's this thing, we can smoke it, it's pretty cool, it'll make you feel good, it'll make you laugh, and you know, and that type of thing. And so like for me, Gabby's got a little different story than I do, but like when I first got into cannabis, there was essentially two kinds. There was brown Mexican and green Mexican. It was all import, you
Yep.
know, and you know, and that's what we could get. And you know, I've said it before on different podcasts, but I think it's relevant to like maybe your guys's thing is that most people, um their import there was imports from Colombia or Panama or Thailand or Mexico or what have you, okay, of these various types of herb,
Yep.
and they came with free seeds,
Yep.
you know. And then so people would grow them,
Yep.
okay. I think and then they would realize that the climate in America, most places in America, is vastly different than say Thailand or Colombia or what have you. And so I honestly think like almost like in California, especially, all the first breeding was how do we get these imports to finish where we're at?
Yeah.
Like, because you grow something and you don't know anything about it. And all of a sudden it grows into the winter
Yeah.
because it's some 5 month sativa and you don't live in a tropical climate. And then it fails on you. And then you're like, well, oh my God, how do I figure that out? And so, like, and that was kind of like, that was kind of everybody. I mean, I'll tell it's a really short story, but it's pretty funny. My first grow, okay, was essentially I had this bedroom in my parents' house, and what I would do with my brown Mexican was you had to prep it before you could smoke it because it came compressed and it was full of seeds and stems.
Yeah.
And so you had to pull all those seeds and stems out of it, right? In order to just have the bud, because I'm sure everybody knows who's listening, but in case you don't, stems and seeds don't taste good. And if you get a seed in your joint or in your bong or something, it tastes awful and it usually ruins it, right? It snap crackles, it pops when it gets hot. Stems don't do that, but they don't taste good at all. And so we would remove that stuff because it was all smushed together. Well, I used to remove that stuff and I used to flick it out my window without even thinking about it, right? Well, one spring, my dad's like, I want you to go outside and mow the lawn. Right. And so I'm going outside and I'm mowing the lawn. And then I get to the part that's under my window. And there was like 4 2-foot tall pot plants of Mexican outside my window amongst the bushes. And I had a moment of like abject terror. Right. So my very first grow, about 30 seconds after I discovered it, it got hit with a lawnmower
Yeah.
immediately, because I was like, man, there was no thought of like digging it up or like how to get away with it or who to bring it to whose house or whatever. I just looked at it and I was like, this is danger. This is getting grounded. This is bad. And so, I stopped throwing seeds out my window
Yeah.
because I realized that maybe that wasn't the greatest, maybe that wasn't the smartest thing. And, there's um, you know, when I got into weed and I started thinking about growing it for myself, um, pre-internet, obviously, I went out and bought books. You
What
know,
books?
I bought 3. I bought Jorge Cervantes's Indoor Marijuana Guide, right? I bought Mel Frank and Ed Rosenthal's book. I can't remember the exact title, but it's gone through a bunch of different editions.
Yeah.
And then probably like the most influential one was I bought Rob Clark's
Marijuana.
a marijuana botany.
Yeah.
And those were literally the only 3 books that I could find in any bookstore related to herb at the time.
Yeah.
you know and the reason why I said the most helpful one was Rob's was because Rob unlocked the mystery for me of like how the plant worked in like pretty simple terms. you know how to breed it, how to grow it, what induced it to flower, all those things that like seem super basic but were not.
Yeah.
Like you didn't know. And
That was his
so huh?
undergraduate thesis. It was his undergraduate thesis at UC Santa Cruz.
It was, yeah. And so he laid out like it laid out in my opinion, in layman's terms, but simple to understand, like how the plant worked. And that was immensely useful, because that wasn't easily available knowledge. I mean, people today are used to being able to just pick up their phone and ask Siri or type a query into it and just go from there, you know. But back then in the early 90s, I think the internet really started popping for people in the mid to late 90s,
Yeah.
as far as like an achievable thing. In the early 90s, it was like go to your local library and search around, read some High Times magazines maybe, and get some tips from people, because it was like this, it was knowledge was at a premium, and you
Where
kind of repeated what you heard.
where did you find the books?
Um, I found the books at a there was I can't remember the name of it. Forgive me, but there was a alternative bookstore in Chicago, and it sold things like the Anarchist Cookbook, you know what I mean, or it had all kinds of weird. Maybe weird's the wrong word, but it had all kinds of like maybe countercultural or books that weren't mainstream type of thing or what have you. And they carried 3 books, and then I bought those and I read them for a year. And that's kind of what got me interested in gardening, especially the indoor gardening one, because I was like, oh, I can pull this off inside, right? And, I mean, we're going to talk about California, it seems, here in a little bit. But I started in Chicago. Chicago has awful weather for cannabis, you know?
Yep.
And at the time that I was coming up in cannabis, um, you know, indoor was having its moment because it was a way that you could keep it secret. There wasn't very many places in America where you could put stuff outside or grow a plant in its sort of natural environment
Right.
and not get in trouble. But a bedroom in your apartment or a closet or, a part of your loft or what have you, that was your eyes only. And so that was a lot more, of sort of the vibe. And so really like, Gaby and I have discussed this before, but like when I got introduced to the Grateful Dead, okay, one of the things I find really interesting about the Grateful Dead, completely separate from the band, was that around themselves, there was a group of essentially American gypsies that sort of traveled with them, right? And so if you're a normal, even if you're an abnormal, if you're just a kid from like regular America, okay, and you went to a Dead show, you were being exposed to a swath of Americana that you did not know existed.
Yeah.
I can tell you when I first went into a Dead lot and there was people, I didn't know what a vegan was. I figured out pretty quickly what a vegetarian was, but they had a different way of eating, they had a different way of dressing, they had a different way of looking, and pot was common amongst that subculture, and then all of a sudden I discovered they had way better pot
Yeah.
than the Mexican that I was getting. And so being a curious dude, I was like, well, why is that? Why is this stuff so much nicer? Right. And so like basically my introduction into growing was, how do I get some of that nicer stuff that's not just Mexican?
Mhm.
Oh, you can grow your own. Well, what does that do? Well, that led me to like learning about electricity and volts and ohms and and 120 versus 240 and the basics of power. And because you couldn't, if you wanted to set up something in your house, you couldn't really ask people because you were trying to pull off something that was pretty illegal at the time. So I ended up buying a book called Wiring Simplified because I didn't because when you're a kid or whatever, when you're like most people, it's like you plug things into the outlet and it works, right? Like electricity is like, but luckily for me, electricity is something that's pretty easily available to learn about. But like, how do you power a light? How come when I plug the light in, it blows the circuit? Because it's too powerful. Oh, it might need its own circuit. I can't have other things plugged into it. And so a lot of early cannabis people learned about plumbing, learned about electricity, learned like maybe basic framing, or a whole host of things just to be able to create a room that they could actually grow in and create the conditions that you could grow in, you know? And so I feel like I almost feel like, I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but I almost feel like a lot of my knowledge comes from the fact that I had to hunt for it really hard, and there wasn't anyone around me that could just give it to me. Where now it's like if you want to get into growing cannabis, there's so many online resources. You probably could have a friend that's doing it. You probably could have someone that could lay out the whole scenario for you
Right.
and get you going. But back then it was sort of like, you're like scared to tell anyone and you're trying to figure it all out in yourself, and everything is a mystery, you know? I mean, even like Rob Clark's thing about like it's not the length of day that's important, it's the length of dark. Well, if you don't know that, that's a real problem. You know, like because you're not going to have success,
Yeah.
type of thing. You
Hey
know?
guys, real fast.
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave and then try to rejoin because my camera, I plugged
Okay.
in something and
Well, I guess I'll talk
so,
a bunch.
yeah, keep talking. I'll be
So
right
if you
back.
guys have any questions, I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't want to just
No,
ramble, but
I've got questions for sure. But before I ask them, I did remember the other part of it. Andrew Whale also
mm-hmm.
wrote a book called From Chocolate to Morphine.
Yeah, 100%. I have that one.
And in that one, like that urge is an urge, same as the urge for food, right? Like the urge to play with your consciousness, like feed something. And of course, we know literally that it feeds the endocannabinoid system.
What's really interesting about that book to me
Yeah.
is for people that don't know, Andrew Weil is like a Harvard educated doctor, but now he's like sort of an alternative medicine guru or what have you. So it's kind of a combination of both. But when he wrote From Chocolate to Morphine, it was sort of like, this is the best scientific info on what these things do to you, good and bad, from chocolate to morphine, right? And he would have all the scientific info that you needed, positive, negative, and sort of like neither, just an effect. And then in the back, he would have like, you know, for lack of a better way to put it, like interviews with people or experiences, you know, where people would talk about like, you know, kicking coffee after being a five cup a day person and like the things that would happen to their bodies. And so for me, that was super interesting because the government gives you all this propaganda. And that book was sort of like the first thing I read where he was like, strip away the propaganda. This is what these substances do to you, good, bad, and neutral, that we know of.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty valuable stuff then,
Yeah.
you know,
That
in
was
my opinion.
my
Anyway.
view. Do we want to swing back to Gaby? Because yeah, I feel like you were in a good spot where you were talking about getting introduced to better weed at the deadlots, and then learning how to do it yourself with all of the different trades that you kind of had to trial and error until you had the expertise in.
So, for me, I had found some better herb before the Grateful Dead, you know, around living in New York City, but nothing like what was available when you went to the Grateful Dead shows. And that's when I found like real kind buds, real homegrown stuff that was brought over from California to the East Coast to sell on the Grateful Dead lot. And yeah, so when the Dead were in town, getting good weed was way easier. And me and the girlfriend at the time, we had gotten some herb at, you know, the Grateful Dead shows, and then we took the train back to Staten Island, which is where I lived, and we were just like hanging out, like on the sidewalk next to these train tracks, and this guy yells at me, "Hey, you guys down, what are you doing?" And he's like, "You smoking weed?" And we're like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, cool." And that turned out to be the guy that's known as the Weasel. And he's the guy that inadvertently made the sour diesel. So, but he invited us up to his place and we smoked weed with him. And he was also a deadhead, you know, ironically enough. And we were talking about how you could grow weed indoors. Like, we hadn't seen it yet, but like we knew this is indoor weed. You could grow weed indoors. And his name's Mike. And Mike was just like, "Oh man," it's like, "I've grown some plants outside in Florida before, but I never grew inside." And so, you know, he had collected some seeds at shows and he planted them in a fish tank. He had just like a 10-gallon fish tank. He put some dirt in it and germinated the seeds in it. And his cats kept digging it out. I'll never forget how pissed he was at his cats because his cats would just keep digging out his plants. And eventually, he made a what is it called? Like a closet, that was a little bit more protected from the cats. And he put just like the old school fluorescents, the fat ones, not T5s. I think they were like T8s or T10s, like the
Probably
old,
T8, yeah.
yeah, the big fat bulbs. And he had like plants growing in his closet with those. And they turned out amazing. And when I say they turned out amazing, even by today's standards, the quality of that herb, like I can still taste it in my mouth, from over 30 years ago, because it was seeds that he had gotten on the dead lot. It was good quality genetics. Now, the buds were so airy that like you could hold them up and like see through them because they were grown with like really poor light. But that was the inspiration. It was like, we can do this. And then, I went and got an apartment and I started growing, with HIDs at that point. And I always like to say it was pretty cool because I inspired Mike to grow. And then when he did it, he inspired me to grow. So like we're really both responsible for each other growing, which, I think that's pretty cool.
I What I mentioned before about like not having a friend to learn things from. I think a lot of knowledge, human knowledge, spreads by like seeing someone your friend or your community doing something and being interested in it, and then wanting to do that same thing,
Yep,
and then you can learn from that person, or you can learn off each other,
yep,
or a lot of human innovation or whatever, in my opinion, comes from groups.
yep,
You know, just seeing,
100%.
like I'll give a quick example, and you ask. But when I first moved to Mendo, it was most, even though 215 technically existed, it was only less than a year old, and it was still pretty much guerrilla, you know. And so Gabby talks about opening a store. It was still guerrilla for the first 4 or 5 years that 215 existed. And then it would be like somebody in their neighborhood would put up a small greenhouse and grow and get away with it. And then they would tell all their friends that they got away with it. And then the friends would come by the house and look at the size of it and be like, I can do that. What do you mean? I can probably get away with that. And so it was like some entrepreneur or some, trailblazer or something like that, for whatever phrase you want to give them, would try something, it would work, and then that would lead to literally dozens of people emulating that person. Maybe not to the T, but like they'd be like, oh, and I think human knowledge spreads a lot like that, where seeing something done really can inspire, well, I can do that too,
Yep,
you know and like the weed community is sort of a word of mouth, shared experiences type of community, you know and so you might have a group of buddies that you smoke with, and if you're doing something like that, like just like Gabby was saying, he inspired his friend, his friend inspired him back, so on and so forth. They learn off each other, you know you learn off people's techniques. Half of human knowledge is sort of like learning how other people screwed up and not wanting to screw up in the same way that they screwed up, type of thing. And so that was kind of like, yeah, it was like little groups of friends,
yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, like, when you talk about the people that Mike inspired, he inspired me, he inspired JJ, he inspired Pete, Staten Island. I mean, he inspired a ton of people to grow by showing them his herb, and he's a tremendously important part of my story, so I wanted to make sure that I mentioned him.
So I'd like to hear a little more detail from both of you about the seeds that you were working with, especially at the very beginning, and you know you knew there are Cali seeds, but like, how much more did you know?
Nothing.
Love to hear about that. Nothing.
I
But
mean,
yeah, well, I mean, I told,
yeah, I'll answer real fast because you
yeah,
might have a longer answer than I do. But my seeds were the seeds that we got from Kind Buds on the lot. And to be honest with you, they weren't even separated. You know, like I had a small bag of seeds. Most of the weed that we were buying was fairly seedless. So finding a seed was like, you
Yep.
know, and
yeah,
Bonus.
but like I didn't even think of at that point like keeping them separated, like this was from that bud, you know, because there's only one seed or something, you know, like this was from that bud in January at Brendan Byrne, you know, like didn't think of it. It just ended up in a bag. And then when I did my first grow, which I can tell that story a little bit more detail later. But when I did my first grow, I planted these seeds and I named them all girls' names. So, you know, like, you know, some ended up being mailed and had to get killed. But at the time, I wanted them, you know, I'm going to just like, what is it, like positive affirmation by giving them female names that more of them will turn out to be girls so that I can save them. And yeah, so that was my first experience with my genetics.
that comment that Gabby made, I would say, like, culturally, that was very common.
Yeah.
Almost everyone I knew that smoked weed, if they found a seed in weed that they liked, they would put it into a tin or into
Film canister.
a film canister or into a baggie or in their sock drawer, and they didn't. I mean, maybe there was some semi-autistic person out there that like carefully labeled where they all came from, but in the 90s, I would say that for the most part, it just got added to the dream of like of like one day maybe I'll do something with this, and you would just add a seed to your little seed collection of like, this was good weed. I enjoyed that weed, whatever it might be. And so that's one of the difficult things about when you like start to learn about like cannabis history, is that you can get all deep into it and eventually it'll start out with a story like that.
Yep.
Like I had this bag of seeds or like canister of seeds that I had just added to during my teenage years from these people I was getting it from, and then I sprouted them. And no, I don't have any idea what they were. No, I didn't separate them or carefully lineage label them or anything else. And so, and then the other thing I thought interesting to mention is when Gabby mentioned his buddy um, that ended up creating the sour diesel, or the sour diesel came from. Sour diesel is one of the probably is if not the most, it's one of the most famous strains in American history, right? And the funny thing about history to me is that, at least when it comes to canna, is that nobody making history knew that they were making history at the time. It was just random dude, young with random dude friends doing things that they had no idea that. I don't know. You hear that sound?
Yeah, that's Dom. Is it raining at your place?
No, it's not me.
Well, when I muted you, it went away.
Anyway, so
Is it
Yes.
better when I turn it off?
Yeah, but I don't know if you want to like log off and then log back on.
I don't know. It wasn't there before. It like
Yeah,
just came out of nowhere.
it's on Dominic's side. There's like
Okay.
it sounded
I'll
like it
turn
was
it off.
pouring rain.
I'll just turn it off and then I'll
Well,
turn
no,
it
wait.
on.
Now I think you sound better. Now I
Now
think you
you're
sound
good.
better.
Now it's
Yeah.
gone.
Okay. We're
Anyway,
good.
um, the I guess like the point I was trying to make is that when you guys like Caleb and Dominic are trying to figure out history, you're dealing with a bunch of people who often made history when they were teens or in their early 20s, and were just doing random stuff that they had no idea anyone would ever care about later.
Yeah.
And then 15 or 20 years later, they're like, hey, can you step by step walk us through exactly what happened?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, so I had this collection of bag seeds
Yeah.
from my smoking experiences, and there was a terrarium, and my buddy, and it sounds silly, but it's like it's really true. It's like you don't know what you're doing in life a lot of times will be important later,
Yeah.
or
But
people will care about later.
and what I want to say about that is that there are different places and social networks that got to the point much earlier where the bag seed thing wasn't the beginning. It all starts with bag seed.
Sure.
But like, you know, Big Sur in the 1950s, they're like, starting to, breed what works in that environment, right? Santa Cruz and Sonoma, in the 60s. And obviously like all over the place. But like the California weed you were getting was coming from those places that you didn't know about as well, right? But around that time in the 90s, I guess, is what we're talking, because it'd be good to also get back to try to
Yes.
remember the
I,
when.
I think both of us are. He might be talking
Yep.
about late 80s because he's a little older than me.
No,
Yeah.
like the first time I saw weed growing was 1990.
Okay.
Yeah,
That,
so
or
90s for
maybe
both of
80,
us.
89, 90, right in that zone.
And I want to ask about that experience, but I would say that like also during this time, the other way people were theoretically not doing bag seed where they were buying from seed companies, usually from
Well, we did
ranch.
that. We did that later.
So that's an early part of my thing.
Yeah.
I could tell that really quick.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Please.
So this is kind of a cool story. Like I said, I was from Chicago. There's this place in southern Illinois called Carbondale. It's a college town. Okay. And there was these growers in Carbondale. And in order to not get busted, because Carbondale is a small town, they would take the weed they grew up to their buddy in Chicago, which was 4 hours north, get paid, and then he would handle it. And then it was sort of like they were anonymous where they lived. You know what I mean? They wouldn't have like a bunch of activity in their hometown that tied back to them, right? Because security was a big deal. Okay. Well, just by the total random chance, the person that they gave all that herb to was my best friend's uncle, right? And so he had this really good weed. And eventually, because he'd known me and my best friend, obviously, like since we were little, he trusted us. And I got to meet one of the guys that brought him the stuff from Carbondale. Okay. And they actually gave me my first cannabis clone when I started growing. And one of the things that they told me was that everything that they grew, they flew over to Amsterdam in 1989 and bought seeds and brought them back.
Yeah.
And so when I decided I was going to grow, the only two places I knew where to get better than Mexican was Dead Tour and this mythical European city that these older dudes had gone to, where apparently you could buy seeds. Right. And so I turned after I turned 18, and got my first place, because in the, now people tend to stay with their parents a little longer, but like in the 90s, moving out and getting your own place as fast as humanly possible was the thing.
Yeah.
Like if you want to kick it with a girl, you need a place. I couldn't even have a girl in my house with the door closed. Per my mom, my parents were pretty strict. So getting out and getting my own spot and being able to like say like smoke weed in my living room or like make out with a girl and not have that was pretty important. And so I just, my friend and I, Gaby knows who he is. He passed away a long time ago, sadly, but we decided we were going to go to Amsterdam and we were going to buy seeds. And so that's what we did. We flew to Amsterdam in the summer of 1994. And that was pretty culture shockish because, I was used to very clandestine stuff, type of thing, trying to get away with it. Everyone was your enemy type of, not enemy, but you know what I mean? Like in the sense of like, you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to get arrested, and then you go to this place and they have coffee shops. You can just make a transaction, all that type of stuff. And we bought seeds and we made these like tiny little notes like of what they were, right? And we undid the hems of our jeans.
Okay.
And we pushed the seeds into the hems of our jeans. with the tiniest little note on what they were, and you could put one strain in the left leg and one strain in the right leg. And so I got to bring home 2, and Sean got to bring home 2, and then we wore those genes
Yeah.
like through the airport. And this was before, I mean, obviously this was 94, so this is before Osama bin Laden ruined flying.
Right.
And tech was a lot more rudimentary, type of thing. And yeah, we brought home seeds.
And what were they? Do you remember what they were that you bought in '94?
Some of them, I mean, we bought some stuff from, I believe, Positronics. We bought some Skunk One, and some, I think, Cali Orange from Positronics,
Mm-hmm.
and we bought some Northern Lights stuff and a couple other things from Sensi Seeds.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Durban
um,
poison?
no, not at
White
that
window?
time.
No.
I bought Black Domina, but that was a couple years. I used to go to Amsterdam. I wouldn't say often, but like, maybe yearly, for a period of time. And I think Black Domina came out in 96 or 97. So I would go, and there would be different things. I had no idea at the time. Like Gabby said, I killed all my males. I wasn't thinking that this stuff was only going to be available for a little while. I didn't realize that, like, most cannabis genetics were sort of a flash in the pan, and you kind of had to act when you acted or they might be gone.
Yeah.
I was just trying to, because, and this is something I think that's pretty interesting, is that because of how I was introduced to it, I was given a clone, and I was taught by the person who gave it to me how to, like, make a clone.
Mm-hmm.
To me, cannabis wasn't like you grew seeds to find a clone
Mm-hmm.
that you could then replicate,
Right.
type of thing. So we would grow up the seeds, and we would keep a clone of each one, and then whatever was the best one we would keep, and we would kill all the rest,
Yeah.
and all the males would be immediately nuked, which, now I'm like, man, I was really dumb. But that's part of human life, is like, when you're young, you're like, oh, I was really dumb. And that just keeps happening, I think, every 5 or 10 years that you're alive until you die, is you're like, man, 5 or 10 years ago I was really dumb. And so, we brought some stuff back, and at the time, because kind bud, nuggets, whatever name you want to apply to it, was pretty rare. If it was better than Mexican, it sold.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like you had to have X strain to make something go. It was like, it was such a commodity that, like, anything that you didn't want to keep, you weren't going to have a hard time finding a home for,
And
type
you
of thing.
sold it by the names of the seeds, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, one thing I think that might be, like, really interesting from your perspective is one thing that's really hard um, as a historian, I guess, is that the American propensity for nicknames,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, because it's like, whatever name your parents give you, like, if there's a nickname that can be given to you, you're probably going to be called by your nickname, and that's just going to become your name. So lots of strains came over here, and they might have initially, by their initial group, get called what they were, but they quickly got a nickname. And then oftentimes that nickname is the only name that we have, that the origin of that. So it's not like a lot of origin stories go back to, like, oh, this is Neville's this. You're like, oh, this is the dog shit, or the electric boogaloo, or this is the puck, or this is the dumpster, or this is the this, or this is the that. And that's just like a nickname of the little smoking group that they decided to give that strain, that they responded to it because, I mean, one of the things that you wanted to do was, like, when you were talking about it, you wanted it to be kind of stealth,
Yeah.
so you might not call it, like, and so, yeah, we're really big on nicknames. We give nicknames to people, we give nicknames to things, we have like a little, and then it was counterculture people giving them nicknames. So it was often riffs on, on pop culture with our own take on it,
Mm-hmm.
which later on historically makes it a problem, because you're like, well, what was it? And you just have the name, which is just like some, you know, 5 dudes in their early 20s sitting around smoking, coming up with some nickname, and then that's what they would just call it amongst themselves, right? Like we were talking about like the film canisters as a way to store herb.
Yep.
The origin of the puck story, okay, is that one of the guys that used to have this strain would carry around nugs of it in a puck case, like a hockey puck, because it was round and flat and would fit in his pocket. And so his buddies used to start calling it the puck because it came in a hockey puck canister, right? And it's the puck, right? It's not hash plant anymore. It's now the puck. And it went to a different group of people, and then they called it the skelly. And so depending on what you got, who you got it from, you might only hear what their nickname was for it. And that might be a true representation of what it was, or it might just be their random nickname that they gave it to stoned one day. You're muted, Gaby.
Gaby.
I see your lips
There I
moving,
am.
but there you are.
How about back in the day, all weed was labeled kind bud on Grateful Dead tour.
Yeah. Nuggets,
Like,
kind
yeah,
bud,
we
the
didn't,
dank.
you know. So it's like, for instance, if I was gonna like label each seed, I would literally just have to label it like,
Bud.
I got it from that guy who wore the Guatemalan hat, you
Yeah.
know,
Or
and
a
you
perfect,
know,
hold on, a
and
perfect
you know,
example,
at
Gabby.
Brendan Byrne, you know, but like I didn't know what it was. It was just kind bud,
A
right?
perfect example would be Gabby and his friend Weasel went to a Dead show, and they bought a bag of weed, or Weasel bought a bag of weed,
We
and
shared it.
okay,
We shared that.
and there was some seeds that came out of it,
Yep.
and Weasel named it RFK 1, 2, and 3
Because
because
we
he
bought
bought
it at
it at
RFK.
RFK Stadium at a Dead show, and so its name became RFK. It's the
Dude, he was
RFK
so
1, 2,
cutting
3.
edge. He
It's a
was really cutting edge.
geographic
Yeah,
indicator of origin. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it
exactly.
was it was
No,
it
no,
was the
no, I didn't
RFK.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and so that and then so that kind of kept happening,
Yeah.
you know. And there's a lot of stories like that. There's this plant that I think might be silver haze, but it was called electric boogaloo in Minneapolis. And then when it went to Oregon, this guy had it, and he had this strain called the cat piss, and he thought it would be funny if he sold the cat piss and the dog shit.
Yeah.
So he changed the name from electric boogaloo to dog shit. And then
Right.
because most people got it through that group of people, it became that. But it was called this in this different group in Minneapolis, and it was probably called something else when they got the seeds.
Yeah. Yeah. My friend Reverend Jeff, that's all he grew. Uh, dog
Kind
piss
bud.
and well,
Dog shit,
cat piss and dog shit.
dog shit. Yeah, yeah.
Literally,
No, I mean that
He's
was
like, I just grow that, like yeah.
yeah, and so and you know and so that's kind of like, I mean, one of the things that's kind of interesting too that I could say is, so when I grew up, when I in Chicago, it was a clone culture. Because you didn't grow outside, you didn't breed really, you were doing stuff clandestine indoors,
Yeah.
and you would get clones and you would grow those out, and then you would try to replicate the same thing. When I first moved to Mendocino County, okay, it was still very much, I would say 99% was a seed culture.
Yeah.
They were an outdoor culture. They grew from seed every year.
Every year.
They would sell mixed pheno pounds, where like it might be all the same strain, but it might be like 4 or 5 or 6 sisters
Yeah.
all blended together into
Yep.
one thing. And they were very much so a seed culture. They weren't a clone culture. The naming and the clone culture in Mendocino and California really started probably with like the purple craze, like the first one, like the Granddaddy Purple, the Urkel, you know, that kind of thing, where people all of a sudden wanted a specific thing,
Yeah.
and they wanted a bunch of pounds of a specific thing. Where previous to that, it was like people grew from seed.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I even remember, I don't tell this story very much, but I'll keep it short. But the first, like, I went to a 90 lighter, which at the time was extremely like, whoa, you know? And they had these beds that were 5 feet wide by 90 feet long in this like woods grow that they had. And they grew all from seed. And then like 10 days in, they would go in with 10 days into bloom or so, they would go in with clippers and they would just cut off all the males at the base. But they didn't grow from clone, you know, they grew straight from seed. You know, they would plant all these seed starts and then whatever was male would just get culled, you know, and hopefully it was enough of a blend that they didn't have like patches in the bed that were all male that got chopped down. But it was a seed culture. People grew from seed, and there was, generally speaking, on each hill or each road or whatever, there might be like one or two like weed nerd geneticist types that really knew the lineage and stuff like that and bred. And there would be dozens of people that would just get seed stock from those guys in their neighborhood and just grow it out year after year, you know? And a really common way of breeding around here would be people would put females in their patch and they would have a selection of males from the same seed stock that they would keep downwind or somewhere else in the shade that it wouldn't mess with their moms. And then as the plants grew, they would pick their favorites, and then as the males dropped pollen in the other location, they would collect that pollen and bring it over to their favorite male, to their favorite females, and tie like some tie tape around some bottom branches and brush pollen onto some bottom branches to make more seed for the future, because it was seed culture and everybody grew from seed. And so when I first moved out here, I was clone culture, because that's the people that taught me that's what you did. You needed, like, it was so hard to get good weed. It's like once you found a clone or got access to one, you needed to keep it alive so you could keep growing it, you know? And so the culture was vastly different in Mendocino County. It was all seed.
I'm going to be interested in hearing how you got to Mendocino County, as well as the impact of the clone culture you brought on the seed culture that was there. Like, I'm interested, like what happened from that. So those are two directions I'd love to.
I can talk about both, you know, if you want me to. Sure. Gosh, I guess I'll start with like how I got to Mendo. It's kind of a weird story, but I had an ex, okay, in Chicago. She wasn't an ex then, but we got together and she got cancer, okay? And she was undergoing chemotherapy and radiation for cervical cancer. And she was losing a bunch of weight. She was vomiting a ton. She was having all these issues. It was really difficult for her to keep food down. They kept prescribing her different things for anti-nausea, and none of it was really working. And I don't know if you guys know very much about like female clothing sizes, but she started out as a size 9 and she ended up a 00, right? So she was really losing a lot of weight and really scary, very young. You know, I'm young in my early 20s or whatever, and watching her waste away. And we had this gynecologist, oncologist, cancer doctor, and he knew we were hippies. You know, we wore tie-dye shirts, you know, and patchwork pants, and it was very obvious that we were Grateful Dead hippie types, right? And so he goes, you know, I can't give you any of this, but we've tried everything. Do you guys know about marijuana? And I was like, yes, we do. And he's like, do you guys smoke it? And he's like, yes. I'm like, yes, we do. And he's like, well, maybe before her chemo treatments, there is some evidence that maybe marijuana could be anti-nausea. I can't help you with it because it's illegal, but we've tried everything. Maybe she should smoke before her chemo treatments and see what happens. So literally, we would get up before the chemo treatments, and this is in the 90s, right? And we would turn on Bob Barker and The Price is Right, because that's morning television then. And her and I would smoke 2 or 3 joints, like, you know, just back to back to back. And then we would drive to the chemo treatment, and she stopped vomiting. Okay? And she started gaining weight back. All right? So I had a friend from Grateful Dead tour that lived in Mendocino County. And he had wanted me to move out there, and I was kind of being resistant, right? And then I think it was in 96 in November, um, the California passed the first medical marijuana law,
96.
215. I think it was late 96. And so he called me up and he goes, dude, they passed this law and they have 5 conditions that you can get cannabis for, you can use cannabis for, and your lady's condition is one of them. I think it was like glaucoma, AIDS, chemo, cancer treatment, that kind of thing, right? He goes, you could come out here and you guys could like grow weed or like have weed and not go to prison. Like they're not going to put you in prison over it. Your lady's a cancer patient. And so in 98 we moved out to Mendo to and we got on a cannabis program. And it's kind of funny actually. It got canceled, but at one point her and I were vetted through the Mendocino County Department of Health, and I had a card from the sheriff's department, literally from the sheriff's department, where you could call the Mendocino County Sheriff, the dispatch, and give them the number on the card, and they would tell other law enforcement, yes, he is an active member of the Mendocino County medical marijuana program, and he is allowed to have X amount.
Yeah.
They actually canceled that program because the federal government threatened, and I think it was in '04, the federal government threatened to like come in and confiscate all the records. And so the sheriff and the DA at the time were so against that, they shut the program down and burned all the records, and then dared the federal government to come after them for it.
Wow.
So that's how I got to Mendocino County.
Medical
Essentially-
cannabis refugee.
Yeah, was my ex was getting chemo treatments in Chicago, was losing a ton of weight.
Yeah.
It turned out that cannabis really worked on the nausea part, and then right around there, 215 was the first medical law that was passed in America. It went from totally illegal everywhere to, and then, I mean, my friend out there was growing, out here was growing. And so he was like, if you come out here, I can give you clones, I can get you set up, I can introduce you to some people, I can help you, And so we moved. Yeah. And we didn't end up working out. We were very young, and she ended up moving back to the Midwest, but I ended up staying, and I'm still here.
Wow.
So I've been here, I don't know, 27 years, long time, more than half my life, something like that. And as far as I have a pretty cool story as far as like the clone culture versus seeds, right? Is I brought out these a couple clones. One of them was called the Crystal Chunk, and the other one was called the Maui. And I ended up meeting Gaby, and I gave him the I had found this strain called the Mendo P in seed. That's another whole thing. But anyway, I had some strains, and Gaby and I exchanged some stuff, and that's how I got what's called the Chem Dog now, and some skunk. And there was a buddy. I opened up with a person. I opened up a head shop in Willits, which is a town in Mendocino County. And that's a whole nother tale in itself. It was considered vice back then. So I literally did, as like a 22-year-old, 23-year-old kid, had to go in front of the Willits City Council and try to convince them that my head shop was not like a pornography store. It was not vice. It could be within 1,500 feet of a church and not like negatively affect the community type of thing. And they gave me an exemption and allowed me to open a store as long as I had the paraphernalia in the back and clearly like delineated that only adults could enter there. And so we opened this shop, and in the front was, a bunch of hippie stuff, tapestries, tie-dyes, Nag Champa, various books or what have you. And then we'd have the classic beads and, fake door or whatever that you had to go through. And that got you into the pipe section, right? The glass section, that type of thing. And what's funny about it is I met this guy and we became friends. And one day I asked him, would you like to stay after and smoke a bowl with us? So he stayed after close. We locked the door. We went in the back. We started smoking. He was blown away by how good the stuff I had was. He was really, really blown away. And he had a boss. Okay, so he goes to his boss, I guess, and he tells his boss that there's this kid in town that has unbelievable weed. So there's this park, you know that park, Gaby, kind of by where you used to get pizza, like on Commercial and Main Street. I was in this park with my dog, and I was throwing a ball for my dog. And this old man, he wasn't old. He was probably in his 30s or whatever. But to me, he seemed like an old man. He sat down next to me at this park, and he goes, so my worker says that you have better weed than we do. How does a little shit like you that barely knows anything have better weed than you? Everyone in town thought you were a cop that opened up this store to figure it out. But we all talked about it, and we decided that no cop could have weed as good as you. So how the fuck did you get this weed? How are you fucking my town? All this different stuff. And this guy ended up being Tony Sasso, okay, who's like a Mendocino County legend. He died a few years ago. I was terrified, because it was like there was this man, it was all big, that sat down next to me and was sort of like fronting on me. Well, it turns out, Gaby, the guy that smoked in the back with me, that loved our weed, is this guy that people know as Tony Mendo. And he's the person that brought the Skittles clone to the community. If he's on Instagram, Team Mendo, and I just randomly met him because we decided to smoke weed together, and he loved my herb. And and that's when I realized, because I look pretty clean cut because of where I came from, it wasn't a good thing to stand out and look hippie-ish. Everybody in Willits thought that I was like some young cop from the academy that had been given the job of opening up a head shop to meet people and to get to know people and bust people. And so the whole town thought I was a narc, essentially.
Funny. Except
And
for
then,
Tony.
and well, Tony thought I was, but then he came in there and he's like, dude, I smoked this guy's weed. He's like, there's no way cops have this good of weed. He's like, there's just no way. And so then we became friends, and then I started getting invited to all these different, bonfires on the river and this and that. And that was sort of when I got introduced to like Mendocino weed culture. Because you got to realize at the time, it was very like spy versus spy, cat versus mouse. It was very much get away with it. It was a very insulated and sort of like non-trusting world, right? People today can be really open about it. But back then, it was sort of like, it was clandestine.
Yeah.
You didn't really want to let other people know what you were up to.
Yeah.
And so me randomly smoking some joints after work with this guy is sort of what unlocked me into getting and meeting a bunch of the people in Mendocino County that actually grew weed.
Are you going to say who that guy was?
I did, Tony Mendo.
No, but Tony Mendo was who you smoked with in the back.
Yeah.
But who was the old guy that you met on the park bench?
I said Tony Sasso.
Yeah.
Yeah. He died a few years ago. He drowned. He's like a Mendocino County legend. He had all kinds of stuff going on. He ended up going to prison for like 17 or 18 years for cannabis cultivation.
Wow.
Yeah,
He's just like an absolute Mendocino County legend.
He
helped
is.
so many
There's
people
tons of
grow.
dudes that are my age through Gaby's age that apprenticed with him, or that he put them onto properties. He taught them how to grow. He set them up. He's a total countercultural outlaw, Mendocino County legend. Sadly, he got out of prison, and he was only out of prison for a few years, and he went swimming in summer in the Eel River that's up here.
Oh, no.
And he had some kind of medical issue, and he drowned.
Oh, man.
Sadly. But not very many people know who he is. But if you're from Mendo from a certain era, he
Then
was
you
the
knew
big.
who he was.
He was the big. If you were in the weed community, he was the big baller. He was the guy with giant brass balls. He was the guy that could pull it off. Tons of people worked for him, and that was he and Tony and this other guy, Craig, to a lesser degree, were sort of like my introduction. They introduced me to a lot of the people. And they honestly, what's funny about that, we were talking about like earlier how how like a lot of times humans learn by getting introduced to things. They were sort of fascinated by me because I was sort of a lone wolf that was young and had my own stuff. Where most people in Mendocino County that were growing, it's like it was almost like an apprenticeship program.
Yeah.
Like someone was growing, and then like the kids of their friends, or some kind of family relation, they would bring on those people as an apprentice, and it was very underground.
Did you bring clones to Mendo?
Yeah, the crystal chunk and the Maui, 100%. And the funny part about that is I was talking before about like how Osama bin Laden ruined flying.
Yeah.
In the Midwest, like going through O'Hare, if you were flying back in the day and you were going through in winter, as long as you didn't beep going through the metal detector, they didn't care. They didn't make you take off your shoes or your jacket or your scarf or your sweater or anything like that. So I still have it actually. You know how like snowboarding shells, like jackets that you'd put on, they have those like zippers like by the main zipper with the pockets.
Yeah.
I took like an 8-ounce water bottle and I cut the top off it and I dropped a rooted clone, one into each one, and then I put plastic with holes popped over it and some rubber bands, and I slipped one into this pocket and one into that pocket, and I literally flew out a clone of each from Chicago to Mendocino. The crystal chunk is long lost. I've been looking for it forever, but I still have the Maui, and I've spread that one out a little bit recently again. So it's, and that clone is from the 90s. So it's quite old.
Wow. So that would be the Maui Wowie?
No, that was another. I mean, that story has caused me some controversy. Let's just say
Maui Wowie, anything that like people were calling shit Maui Wowie that wasn't Maui Wowie, it was like the first strain to just like everybody would just call it that. So
that was what my friends that gave it to me called it.
Yeah. Maui.
For lack of a better, they just called it the Maui, and
Okay.
they ended up telling me. My buddy ended up telling me this whole story about it that was total horseshit. And so I have like 3 competing stories from back in the day, and that's something that we should also mention. One of the things that makes like history so hard with cannabis is that we would often people would often like leave things out or lie or fib to keep themselves protected.
Yeah.
Because it was clandestine and stuff like that. Like I used to have this thing I don't know if I ever told you this, Gaby, but like when I grew in Chicago, there was 3 people that knew I grew weed. 3. Okay. And one of them was my best friend, and he would sell it for me. Okay. It was Sean. Right. And so we would go to parties together, and like at a party of 20 or 30 people, I would openly buy $100 quarter from Sean.
Yeah, you
at the party. Right. And then that way, when people saw me with it, I wasn't the grower. The grower wouldn't be buying $100 quarter from their buddy. Right. So of course it couldn't be from me. So we literally would plan it out where like I would buy a quarter from them once or twice a month at like little gatherings we were at or whatever with our friends. So it would be obvious that I was a custody.
Yeah.
And not someone that was doing it. That was really important. I had to be a custody. Because it was like, back in the day, if you got in trouble, if you could give the cops a grower, that was a get out of jail free card. You could get robbed because it was so valuable. You could get busted by someone getting caught and like telling their mom or telling the friend like, oh, you're gonna, so it was like it was pretty secretive.
Yeah.
It was very secretive, and the penalties in Chicago were harsh. They were very harsh, I bought this, speaking of books, I bought this book called, I think it's called Cannabis Law, where they sort of laid out, and that's when I learned about like words like curtilage, and I learned about like your Fourth Amendment right, and I learned about like probable cause, all that different stuff. I learned mostly trying to keep myself out of trouble and what to do and how to interact,
I never worried about any of that shit.
Well,
I mean, Francis has always been much smarter than I have. I mean, he thought things more thoroughly.
Well,
I just did what I could do.
So I'll tell you, this is not cannabis story per se.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say this isn't a knock on Gaby.
No, this isn't a cannabis story. But you went to Buckeye Lake, I'm sure, right, Gabby? Buckeye
Once.
Lake. Buckeye Lake was this venue in Ohio that the Grateful Dead played at sometimes in the 90s. And so I went there with my friend, and afterwards, we went to a hotel, and my friend, took, bought and sold sometimes LSD, you know, and he ended up selling some to an undercover cop. And when he was 19, and he got 26 years in prison. And that happened when I was 18 years old. And so I had this like close friend of mine that had gotten thrown in jail for decades, and so amongst our friend group, that made like not getting in trouble like a little bit more of a reality, if that makes sense. Even though it was a totally different substance and all that kind of stuff. So but yeah, I mean, the cool thing, one thing I should mention too about Mendocino County that I think is kind of important to mention is that outside, like going to a dead show where Gabby and I have talked about, there was like a decent amount of weed culture. Mendocino County, Humboldt, Trinity, they call it the Emerald Triangle or whatever. It was really a bubble in America where it was one of the few places in America that actually had weed culture.
Yeah.
Where there was groups of growers that trusted each other enough. Once you got into those circles, there was knowledge being shared. There was a lot of different stuff. In most other places in America, if you wanted to do that, you were going to be pretty isolated. And I would imagine a situation similar to what I talked about. Maybe a couple friends knew. In Mendo, it was more culture. And so if you got into that culture, all of a sudden you would learn so much more.
It's part of the social fabric of those places.
It was
right?
well. It was also too. Like my coming from the city, I had vast misconceptions about what the country would be like.
Yeah.
Like living rural, basically. And when I moved to Mendo was extremely poverty stricken. The logging industry had collapsed. Logging was most of the blue collar type of jobs that Mendocino County had. And so Mendocino County was pretty depressed and pretty poor. And so a lot of people secretly grew weed, and that income helped them have more of a normal life and not have destitute poverty. And so that was,
You're talking about this demographic that, didn't go big. They grew a few plants, partly to manage risk.
I
but
should
also,
say this, right? Going big. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a guy who grew up here. People know him as Mean Gene,
Yeah.
Anyway, him and I have known each other a long time. And it's like back in the day, yeah, exactly. Him. I've been friends with him forever. But, if you got away with 20 pounds, you were set for the year.
Yeah.
And we used to have this joke that you would have 3 patches. You have 1 patch for the thieves, 1 patch for the cops, and 1 patch for you. Because the idea was that if you had 2 or 3 little patches, hopefully one of them would survive. And you would grow in the bushes, or you would grow in the manzanitas, and you would grow in the tree line. Some people even grew on platforms that they built in the trees.
Yeah.
Because it was very difficult to get away with. So like people think of like greenhouses and full sun and outdoor and getting a lot. If you got 5, 10, 15, 25 pounds or something like that, you were doing well.
Yeah.
So things back then were much smaller because there was helicopters, there was police presence, there was all kinds. I'm not saying that the big things didn't exist and occasionally people didn't get away with big things, but in general, going big was much smaller.
Back then, going big never meant like having, 30 greenhouses on the top of a hill with full sun.
So I'll tell a very small story.
That.
Gaby and I, Gaby bought a property. I want to say 03 or 04. I can't remember, something along those lines. He bought a property in Mendocino, and we were going to build a 20 by 50 greenhouse on it. And I bought all the materials, and Gaby kept looking at it, and he kind of panicked that it was way too big, and it was a guaranteed bust. There was no way that they would let us get away with such a mammoth endeavor. And so we shortened it to 20 by 30, and he was still pretty panicked that there was no chance we were going to get away with it. And so that was, even then, was that 03 or 04?
Something
02?
like that.
Something like
It was
that?
after '02. It probably was maybe '04.
04, something like that. Yeah. So even then, 215 was still young enough that like the idea of getting away with a 20 by 50 was ballsy. You were like, whoa.
Yeah. I bet there were like different parts of that region though where it was a little more common than others.
Yes.
Well,
100%.
just because we didn't know, there were, we weren't like revolutionary. Like there were other people
Well,
doing it that we didn't know, and like maybe they weren't as nervous as I was at the time.
let's put it this
You
way.
know,
During the grow season, there was helicopters that canvassed our county looking for stuff. And if they found it, or if it was big enough, they might put it on the schedule, and one day you might come and get chopped.
Yeah.
And so the bigger it was, the juicier of a bust it was
Yeah.
for them. And
Plant
they were
crops.
flying every day all the time. So yes, were there people getting away with bigger? 100% there was. But it was also like, you know, um, did they get away with it every year? Probably not. Most people you talk to had stories of either busts or getting at least cut down. We used to call it camped, because camp was the coalition against marijuana planting,
Yeah.
right? And we would call it getting camped, where they would come to your spot and they would chop all your stuff down. And people should know this. In order to not get busted, a lot of growers would put their crops pretty far away from where they lived in order to make sure, hopefully, that if they did get busted, it wouldn't lead them directly back to their families' houses, right? And so there used to be a lot of hiking involved.
Yeah.
You would get to the patch, figuring out ways to get water to the patch.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing, I've told this before, but this is kind of a cool story. There's this place, it's still here. There's this place in Willits called Spare Time Supply that was sort of like the big, like grower, outdoor grower, like grow store, for lack of a better term. And you would go in there, and I'm 6'3". They would have cases of like like the tannish camouflage spray paint that were taller than me. And the reason for that is that it doesn't rain in Mendocino County in summer. And so water is at a premium. And so if you put like that soft black poly tubing to get water to your plants, wood rats and other creatures would smell the water, and they would typically chew through the lines to get to the water. And then all of a sudden your plants would be suffering because they wouldn't pressurize. So people would often do PVC because the animals wouldn't chew through that. But then the PVC was white and easily visible from the air. So what people would do in winter is they would get all their PVC and they would lay it out on a big tarp, and they would get camouflage spray paint, and they would spray paint all of the PVC so that when they laid it on the ground and they put leaves over it, it wouldn't reflect light or shine up to the cops
Yeah.
whatsoever.
So, yeah. No, that's another key aspect of what was going on. I would like to hear a little bit about Gaby's. Gaby, I guess where we left off with you is
I was still in New
chronologically-
York.
You were still in New York, and I'm wondering if we can ask you about, essentially New York to how you got to California and ended up meeting a Notsodog.
Well, I mean, should I tell the story about my first grow in New York City,
Yeah,
or should I? Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
we were talking earlier about the seeds that I planted with all girls' names, and that was in a 3-story apartment in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and this was in 1991. Think like held the place from maybe like March of '91, and we moved out like right around New Year. But so we, me and my girlfriend at the time, we were renting this place. It was my first, like, my own apartment ever, you know. And actually, just to take a step back, I left Staten Island because something bad happened, weed related. And I wanted to make sure that I documented this for part of the story because, like, my family lived in New York. And remember before when you were like, the neighborhood had your back?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I remembered at one point when the neighborhood, and this is far worse than like my neighbor's mom telling on me. So what happened was I I was staying home with my parents because like we tried to move out to California in a Volkswagen bus and it like blew up. The van like caught on fire 137 miles from California. So went back home, had no place to live. I lived with my parents. My girlfriend lived with her parents. And I was like broke. I mean, it's like I lost everything I owned in this fire, in this, you know, Volkswagen bus, right? And so I'm outside one day, and one of the neighborhood kids is like, "Hey, Gabby, how you doing?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm all right, you know." And he pulls a gun out, okay, and he's like hitting me in the head with the butt of the gun, and he's saying, "Give me your weed." Okay, now, you know, I grew up on Staten Island. Around the block from my house, there was a bunch of mobsters that lived there, like real mobsters. Like these were kids of famous mobsters, you know? And I never, you know, like I think there was one time where I might have sold them weed or something. I don't know. Like I never hung out with these guys, but you know, they were neighborhood kids, you know? And like when you're younger, you don't really think about like, you know, or even know like who these kids' parents are. You know what I mean? But anyway, I was broke. I had no weed. I'm living at my parents' house, and these kids are poking me in the head with a gun. Cause like now they're like got a little bit older, you know, and they like want to be like their gangster dads, you know, and so that's when I was like, and I told them I was like, I have no weed. They're like, go in the house and get it. I'm like, bro, I have no weed in the house. Like I explained to him, I just lost everything, and you know, and luckily they didn't make me like go into my house. You know, like my parents were in the house at the time, while I'm being like held up at gunpoint outside the house. And so that was it. Like I was like done with Staten Island, and me and my girlfriend at the time, we got an apartment in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And that's when I grew all those plants that I like named Francine, Darlene, Lisa, whatever, you know, like it was just any white name, you know, and like, so you know, we grew there, and that was the first time I grew under HID lights,
Okay.
and I'm gonna mute you because I'm hearing it from your thing again, I think. So it was the first time I ever grew under HID lights, and you know, we did great because there's something to be said even today about the vigor of a seedling and young genetics. You know, like even if you take clones off of seedlings, like when they're young, they haven't gone through all this stress, you know, and that's why, you know, the sour diesel today isn't the same as it was, you know, in the 2000s, because even the same genetic has just gone through so much stress and epigenetic changes that it's just not exactly what people want it to be, right? But these young plants, they did so amazing and, you know, did quite well. You know, it's very easy to sell. Yeah, I have to keep that muted. It was very easy to sell because, indoor homegrown like this was so not common. I'm going to pause 1 second. I want you to be able to talk, but there's a loud sound on your side there, Dom.
Oh, okay. No worries. Keep me muted. I
Well,
actually
I was
am.
going to say you can mute yourself and then unmute yourself when you want to talk.
Okay.
So anyway, I was growing in this apartment and we did really well and we were like saving up to move to California. So, I had failed moving to California once before, when that van caught fire. This time I was going to be more prepared with a little bit more money and so we're like getting ready to move. Oh, by the way, I'm going to stop real fast and say I am repeating some stories that I've told before, but Dominic and Caleb haven't heard them, and it's for the purpose of this study. So, like, a few people have said in the past, like, they heard this story before, and it's like, I hope you guys are willing to tolerate us retelling stories that we want to be documented for this story. But, so anyway, I'm drying I think I still have some plants growing, but I'm already drying some plants that it's going to be my last crop. And I live on this 3-story brownstone. And on the bottom story, there was like a poker club. It was just like a little private poker room where like some old Polish guys would play poker there like once or twice a week. Then on the second story, there was a Polish family. There must have been like 10 people living in this place because there's a lot of people living in there. Okay. And then next door was a gay couple. And then we're on the 3rd story, and it's me and my girlfriend. And then across the way, there was another young couple. They were like our age. And we never talked to anybody. We lived there for like 7-8 months. We never spoke to anybody because we didn't want to become friends and have people want to come over and, like we're growing weed there. And so this is like my last days of growing, before the plan is to move to California. And I get a knock on the door. And I'm like, holy shit, who's knocking at the door? Because to get into this apartment, you have to ring the bell at the bottom. So like they're already in the building, they're already at my door. No one has ever knocked at my door. Who's knocking at my door? So I like go up to the door and I'm like, hello? And it's the girl that lives next door. And she's like, I was just wondering, could I get a joint? And I'm like, oh my God, like she knows, right? So I open up the door and I just like pull her in and shut the door because I was drying in there. And it was an apartment, right? And it was a railroad apartment. So one room goes into the next room, which goes into the next room. And so like the first room when you walk in was the kitchen. The very next room, that was the grow. Okay. And then the next room was my bedroom, right? So once she came in, she was like, holy shit. She's like, I knew you guys were growing, but I didn't know you were growing like this, right? And so like I show her around and she's just blown away. Like the herb is hanging in my closet and I used to have boxes that I was drying in. And I take her into the grow room where there's still some plants and she's just like, she's never seen anything like this before. And like, the lights are on bright, and she's just like, and so she says to me, she says, man, like this is incredible. She's like, I'm growing too, but nothing like this. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, we have a couple of plants next door, but, she's like, it's not like this. I'm like, all right, now you need to show me. So we walk across, like, my front door to her front door, there was like maybe 6 feet in between it. You know what I mean? It's like if we opened up the door at the same time, we would bump into each other, right? Like we're directly across from each other. So I go across to her apartment and she has plants growing in her windowsill, the window to the street, And I didn't like, and like the plants were never gonna make it. It was like these little plants, and it was too late in the year. You know, it was like December, and they've got seedlings and stuff. And I'm like, holy shit! I was like, you have to get rid of this right now. I was like, you you can't keep these plants here because you're gonna get me busted. Because if you're down at the bottom of the street, and by the way, this is like before carbon filters and stuff like that. You know, we're on the top story and we're venting out, and but you know, if a police officer on the street looks up and sees a plant in the window, and then they get through the door, they climb up the stairs like this. Once they get to the third story, you know, like which door it is to open, right? And like, I was gonna get busted because, and you know, they were doing it for a long time, and nobody ever saw it or cared. But I was like, holy shit! I was like, I'm gonna get busted. You got to get rid of these plants. I'll give you weed, and then I'll like give you gear and teach you how to do this right, right? So she let me kill the plants from her like right there on the spot. I like literally just went like snapped them with my, because they were unhealthy. They, you know, weren't getting enough light or anything. They were unhealthy, and so I killed those plants. And now, like a couple of weeks later, we finished harvesting and trimming everything, and like we're getting ready to move to California. And I gave her clones of all my plants, and I gave her the gear. I wasn't gonna take the stuff out with me to California. The plan was to just like buy new shit when we get there, because we were driving, right? So I'm not gonna drive with like a couple of fucking high pressure sodium lights and all this shit, you know? So I left her all the gear, I left her all the genetics, and I gave her some tips on how to grow, and we were gone. And the crazy thing is like, this was before cell phones. So like, I've never spoken to this person again. You know, it's like, I wish someday somebody would come up and be like, hey, I was your neighbor in Greenpoint and you gave me all these plants. And you know what? I still have the Francine, you know,
Yeah,
like,
that's wild.
like, because the Francine, that was a plant that helped me be a very small part of the ChemDog story. And, you know, I'll get to that. Like, moved to California, didn't take any of the grow equipment, but I took my best plants. And one of the ones that I took was called Francine, right? And, you know, the way I would take the plants, because I would, you know, it was just like put it in a cup. We were driving across country, you know? So like put it in a cup, I can put a lid on it, you know, and we drove across country. And the reason that I moved to California wasn't for herb. The reason why I moved to California was for Jerry, right? I was living on the East Coast, and we would see Grateful Dead shows a couple of times a year. But like, it was difficult. There was traveling, you know, and Jerry used to play the Warfield all the time when he wasn't touring with the Grateful Dead. He'd play with the Jerry Garcia band there. And I think it was, or I know it was 1990. I was still living on the East Coast. We traveled out west to go see Jerry at the Warfield. And that was just game changing for me. Like when that happened, I was like, oh, I need to be here. And the difference was between like on the East Coast, we're seeing the Grateful Dead at like giant stadium, okay, or like big arenas. And like it was just an insane scene outside, and like you might not get, you know, tickets. I mean, it was just like, it was just craziness at this point. This was after the like touch of gray, you know, after the Grateful Dead started to get big, you know. So when I went to see Jerry at the Warfield, it's like you didn't even need to worry about a ticket. Like you could just get it outside the day of the show, like for face value, no problem, you know. And he would play there, and it was such an intimate thing. Like, after I saw that, I said, I love Jerry Garcia band way more than I love the Grateful Dead. Because like during the Jerry Garcia band, he like, it wasn't about like a jam, or it was more about like he would pour his heart and soul out to you, you know, in a way that like it just didn't seem that way with the Grateful Dead. I don't think it was, you know, like it was beautiful music obviously, but the Jerry Garcia band, that's what made me want to move to California so that I could just see Jerry at the Warfield, you know, instead of going to like 10 or 15 shows, you know, in a year that I traveled around for, I could see that many shows at the Warfield in a few months, and it would be like an hour from my house. And then also there's this thing like, first of all, I had that gun being held to my head. And I had another incident where I was robbed in Central Park at Sheep's Meadow, which like Sheep's Meadow was like the spot to like sell shit. And it was like, I don't know if you guys know about Sheep's Meadow, but it was like a really beautiful park. Like in the summertime when it's nice, everybody's hanging out, people are throwing frisbees. It's just like the classic American like hangout park, right? But then once the weather would change, then it would like get a little uglier. And it was probably always had an ugly side, but like the ugliness became more overwhelming. And I like had somebody put a pen to my neck, making me think it was a knife to rob me for my weed. And I was like, you know what? I'm fucking out of here. Like, I'm going to California, and I'm gonna see Jerry at the Warfield multiple times a year, and that's gonna make me happy, you know? And so I took those plants across to California, and I ended up in Petaluma. And we like tried to go everywhere. Like, first place we wanted to go was Big Sur, right? Big Sur holy weed, and you know, I've seen pictures of it. It looks amazing. It was like there was no way anyone was gonna rent to us. Like, with, you know, we had some cash, but still like no money, you know, no job, nothing. And it's like, so we couldn't get a place there, and we were just traveling everywhere, you know, with Santa Cruz, and we ended up in Petaluma. And this landlord had his home in the front, and then he had 3 little cottages in the back. And you know, the rent was like $1,000 a month or something like that. And you know, he was interviewing us, you know, like to see if he would rent us the place. And he said, you know, you guys don't have a job. You guys just drove over here, and you know, what makes you, and you know, because I was like, look, I can pay for 3 months, you know, because I came with some cash. He's like, but you know, you guys don't have a job. What makes you think that you're going to be able to make it here? And I just looked at him and I said, you have no idea that, like, for me, not succeeding at moving here is not an option. And like, he saw the motivation in my eyes that like I was gonna make it. I told him, I said, I'm gonna do whatever it takes. Like, I'm going to be able to stay here. And he believed me. And, you know, if he didn't, like, we were already almost broke. Like, you know, because we thought we'd move, you know, come to California with some cash in our pocket, we'd be able to rent a place. Instead, we're living at like the long-term hotels, spending all of our money, you know, at long-term hotels. And so eventually we found this guy, and he believed in us. Now, if he would have known I was going to grow in the house, he probably wouldn't have given me the place, you know, but he did, and we did, and that's where I grew, you know, for the first time in California. You want to try to unmute your mic and see if it's better now?
Yeah, maybe it's better
Yeah,
now.
it's perfect now.
Well,
Yeah,
this has
it's
been
better.
great. Yeah, you haven't needed me. You were going right along in exactly the kind of directions I wanted you to. So you grew right there in Petaluma.
Yeah.
What?
And so it was okay, this cottage was crazy because it was all cement, All right, like so, like every wall, including was the cement, and I didn't have as good as skills, and we were like scared to ventilate because it was so close. So like I think I was like just pumping the air like in between the walls in the house, like it was just psychotic, and it used to rain, literally rain inside my grow room because I would get condensation on the cement ceiling. Okay, and so I used to have to mop the ceiling in my first grow, to stop the fucking water from dripping on my plants, during the crop. There was no dehumidifiers, and this was like one of my first times. I did it in New York, but like I'm by no means a skilled grower at this point, and even if I had experience in New York, coming here, it was totally different. Different climate, different building, different, and so it was like, but so that's where I was growing the Francine, and I think I was growing the Nige and some other plants that I had. And so now I have this weed that I grew, my first crop there, but I don't know anyone. And the Grateful Dead aren't playing, right? So like, because I had just moved to California, don't really know anyone. Now I have all this weed. What am I gonna do? It's just like, so I go down to San Francisco to the panhandle of Golden Gate Park. And that's where I met, he goes by VA Skunk. Okay. And that's where I met him. And we hit it off. What's funny was, and he tells this story on other podcasts, but like he was coming at me trying to sell me weed. Like, he thought I wanted weed. And then I was like, oh no, I have weed. I wanted to sell it to you. Because like we're both like obvious hippies, in the panhandle of Golden Gate Park. And so I brought him to my van and I showed him the weed. And I told him how much I wanted for it. And he's like, oh, I can totally do that, and he sold all my weed, and so like it saved me. I was going to be like, unable to pay the rent because, everything counted on, like I gave him 3 months rent because the whole idea is I got to get in here, get a crop started, and then I'll be able to pay for things again. Right. But so now I got this weed, I got to sell it. And, he saved my ass and we became friends. And I'm getting distracted because we're no longer friends, but we became friends. Anyway, we're both deadheads. And, I told him that, hey, look, when Jerry plays the Warfield, I always show up early and I get this same spot. Okay, I used to go and wait online at 2:00 in the afternoon. There'd only be a few people out there waiting to get in. And I'd always get this table for 10 in the corner. And, I would show up and all my friends would show up like just as Jerry was hitting the stage. But like I'd get there and I would guard this table like with my life because there's 10 chairs there. And so like, I'd be sitting there by myself and people would be like, oh, can I sit here? And I'd be like, no, can't sit there. They'd be like, why not? I was like, oh no, this is for my friends. And they're like, you can't save seats. I was like, oh, well, I got here at 2:00 in the afternoon. It's like, these are my seats over here. And nobody ever argued with me. I mean, maybe initially, but eventually, like my New York attitude, I was able to scare people off and nobody ever fucked with me. And I always had this table for 10. And so I told Jason, I was like, yeah, I always get this table. If you ever want to hang out, come and do it. And so he did. The next time Jerry played, he did. And we became friends. And, we used to always hang out at that table. And, lots of people showed up. And so one year or one set of shows, he has a friend coming from Virginia that, is going to come out to the Jerry shows, and he wants to know if he can join us at the table. And I'm like, sure. I just sounded like a mafia type guy, didn't I? Hey, can he join us at the table? I didn't mean it like that, but I was like, yeah, sure. And so what happened was he comes and he brings some skunk from Virginia, okay, like some flower. And it was really, really special. It's like
From
I had,
Virginia?
yeah, okay. The skunk was from Virginia. Now, it turns out that weed actually came from Sensi Seeds, right? The super skunk, but that they like inbred with it to make their own seeds, and they just called the skunk from Virginia, which now, you'll hear they call it the mass super skunk. And I'll get to that, how that change happened. But so he comes to the show, and I love his skunk, and he loves my Francine, and, we talk about doing a trade, right? And so I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I will fucking drive to New York City or, drive to the East Coast with the clones and trade with you. And he's like, great. So I drove the Francine across country. So I had driven it from east to west, and now I'm driving it back from west to east, okay? And I used to drive it like in a Burger King cup, okay? And I would just like put a lid on the cup if I ever needed to like hide it, like if a truck was gonna pass on the highway, I would just like cover it. And, I took it into hotels, and I would put it in the bathroom where I would leave the light on so that the plants wouldn't flower. And so we meet in New York, because I have family in New York, and he's from Virginia. So he met me in New York, so I didn't have to go down to Virginia. And he brought the super skunk, or the skunk, super skunk. It was the skunk, right? So he brought me that plant. And I had already known Greg is Chemdog. Okay, I had met Greg previously. I think we met at a fish show. And I had been up to his grow, and he was growing the Chem 91, and he never wanted to give it away. It was like clearly a special plant, even when it was grown poorly. Which it wasn't grown great. We didn't know what we were doing, is the reality. Like we're trying to figure it out. I'll never forget, he was growing it in a hydro system it was just like a wick system. It's called the Emily's Garden by Hydrofarm. It's like these two little orange trays, and then there was wicks that went into the pots, and that's how the plants, got kept wet. And it's, wasn't an ideal system for growing cannabis, in my opinion, but the weed was spectacular. And so when I told him that I had this super skunk, he was willing to trade me for the Chem 91. And so the guy from Virginia, he actually brought me a couple of clones of the skunk. And so I took one of those clones up to Virginia, up to Massachusetts, and I traded Greg for the Chem 91. And then I proceeded to drive that plant and the skunk back across country. So people have to consider, nowadays, mailing clones is such a common thing. We get genetics all around the world, but back then, putting clones in the mail, this was 100%. Who was gonna accept it? It wasn't gonna come to my house. Okay. Hold on a second. I don't know how to block someone in the chat, but people are being a little bit stupid.
I mean, this is also a really good example of how the genetic they didn't just flow from California to Amsterdam and back, they they were also like California, Amsterdam, back, California, Virginia, and California, Massachusetts, back. Like literally, like you're carrying genetics across country to multiple different places, and it's just
I mean, like
really
when I
rich
drove
picture of like,
when I
yeah,
drove back the
of this
second
work.
time, I did it by myself, right? So it must have taken me at least a week, and then drive, there's no route to drive through from east to west, where at some point you're not in a place that they would throw you in jail for life for a seed at that point. Okay? So, you know, it was super risky. But like not as risky as putting it in the mail. You're muted, Dominic. So, anyway, I brought that plant from east to west, the Chem 91. And I don't know. I hate getting into it too much, but like the reality is that, VA Skunk, even though I got a problem with the guy now, he is a part of my story. So like leaving it incomplete, particularly when we're trying to like do this story for, to actually document the full story, it would be wrong of me to not to leave that stuff out, right? So, but
Yeah.
if I get a little choked up about it, now, you know, hopefully you can
I
understand
totally
why.
understand. So, help me out here though with the what year did you arrive in Petaluma?
1991,
1991. Okay.
yeah, like probably January-ish.
Yeah. Uh, did you well, gosh. So you developed a network into like different places where your weed was going. And what about like in the general sort of Sonoma, maybe Santa Rosa area? Did you find that there was a strong weed culture like would have been found in Mendocino, for example?
Well, I was extremely paranoid, right? So like part of the reason why I went to San Francisco was because I wasn't gonna shit where I eat, right? Like I didn't want to be known where I live as the hookup for weed because I was growing there, right? And like the people that I was meeting, while they may be cool, like most of them weren't deadheads. They were cool people, but like, and like sometimes I would sell them a little weed, but like, it's funny because Francis, do you remember Brian who used to work for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was friends with Brian, but he didn't know that I grow weed, right? Because I didn't tell people. And one day he's near my house and he just shows up, just knocks on the door. And by the way, at this point, I'm living in Sebastopol. We only lived in Petaluma for like a year or so before we were able to move to Sebastopol and upgrade the grow. So anyway, he knocks on my door and I'm like, who the fuck is this? And so I go out there and it's Brian. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing here? And he's like, well, I was just in the neighborhood, so I decided to just say hello. And I was like, you don't fucking show up to my house without fucking calling. Like, I was so freaked out. And he was like, what the hell? Like, dude, I was in the neighborhood. I just stopped by to say hello. Why are you freaking out? Like, and that was probably like a tell, like that something's going on, but he had me like legitimately panicked about like, who's knocking at my door. Cause I purposely was being very isolated. I, wasn't making friends like that, and
Well,
so
do you feel like that was really a legacy of your, what had just happened to you on the East Coast,
what do you mean? Like the gun thing?
Yeah.
No, it's just like I always felt like you couldn't trust people to know that you grow because not that they're gonna rat you out, but they're gonna tell somebody and then it's just gonna like blow into something, you know? And like, so nobody knew that I grew. People that I was friends with, they didn't know that I grew. And, and Jason, you know, in the city, he didn't know where I lived, you know? So like, it was just keeping my shit as fucking tight as possible.
Yeah, I
And you know,
mean,
the thing is, it was before cell phones, right? So
yeah,
like people had my number, right? But like he was just in the neighborhood. He doesn't have a cell phone. They don't
no,
exist, right?
you
He
were in
just knocks on the door.
Sebastopol. Yeah,
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 it's like a normal thing for your friend to knock on your door.
yeah.
But you know, when you're a paranoid grower, you know, then that's not normal anymore.
Yeah. So, like, at some point, though, you start to make friends who do know about what you're doing. I mean,
So
eventually you meet.
the only person for a long time was Jason, you know, because what happened with Jason was when Jerry Garcia died, he got a place and I gave him all my genetics, including the Chem 91, okay, and the super skunk that I subsequently lost. So the super skunk that I brought up from, you know, Virginia to Massachusetts to trade for the Chem dog, because it was in Massachusetts, somehow the name changed to the Mass Super Skunk. Okay, and you know, brought that clone back here. We grew that one, and you know, Jason introduced me to the guy that gave it to me, and you know, like I said, we became friends. So I taught him how to grow. I gave him the Mass Super Skunk. I gave him the 91. You know, I basically gave him all the clones that I had, and I taught him to grow. But you know, he ends up being, you know, quite famous for holding the Chem 91 and, you know, based his entire brand on it when, you know, I changed directions. You know, I started working in the grow shop scene. And like I eventually like, you know, I stopped growing for a minute, maybe like a year or two, and then started growing again and it was small. And, you know, I did the greenhouse with Notso and, you know, some other, you know, stuff. But while I had my grow shop, so the grow shop was in the time of, you know, still prohibition. People were still getting camped on. And, you know, they were just coming out with medical, but it was still like a little bit uncertain on, you know, what you could do. So it was kind of like a defense, but we still weren't waving it around too much at that point, you know? And I built my grow shop. What happened was I used to work for somebody, Slavic, at the Hydro Depot. And he, I went to his shop. This is in Roner Park still in California. And he offered me a job at his store because I always used to talk to the clients. I'd go in there and, you know, I'd hear people talking and I would start talking to them about growing and different stuff because it's what I like to do, you know? And I was like, okay, I'll work here for a year. This is what I'm thinking to myself. I'll work here for a year and then I'll buy, you know, I'll have credit and I can buy a house. And, you know, after I buy the house, you know, I can just quit and, you know, go back to growing. So that was the plan. And hold on a second.
Was this in
That's
Sebastopol?
actually
I was living in Sebastopol and the grow shop was in Roner Park.
on that park. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up realizing how much I love talking about cannabis. And that's like where, like even up to today, why I love doing the podcasting. Because I really love talking to people about cannabis. And, when I first started working there, Slavic would say, hey, I want these guys to buy and get out. And I would say to him, I was like, no, because when they hang out, we're building a relationship with them that makes them want to shop here. And also, as we talk, then they figure out, oh, well, maybe I should try this, or maybe I should try that. And that's what happened. And, I don't want to say I'm revolutionary, but at that time, when you go to the hydro stores, it was very quiet. We have no conversation about cannabis, and we didn't at the Hydro Depot either, but we still talked about growing. I said to him, I said, look, we can talk about growing without talking about weed, right? So we would,
Maybe I should interject just
go
really
ahead.
quick. Is like
That's what we meant.
from what Gabby just said. From what Gabby just said, it was kind of like going into like a pipe shop and you had to call a bong a water pipe because bong meant cannabis correlation and you couldn't do that because that was illegal. So it was like all the grow shops, like that was sort of the elephant in the room, was like you needed to buy stuff and you wanted to be able to talk about stuff, but you couldn't mention that it was for that
Right.
at all because the store owners and stuff were worried about like undercovers trying to come in and prove that there was a link between your shop and illegal activities.
That was
And so like
constantly
if you
going
went
on.
into like
Yeah.
if you went into a head shop and you said I want to buy a bong, they would throw you out of fear.
Yeah.
And so what Gabby was just saying about like, well, we can talk about growing without specifically mentioning cannabis and just talk about, you know, um,
How you make a grow
things that,
room, how
yeah,
climate is
lights,
important. Yeah, exactly.
amps,
About
watts, so on and so forth.
fertilizer, how to use the lighting relay box, all these different things. And,
Yeah.
that really set us apart from all the other grow stores, which what they did was they got stuff in the back of the warehouse. You show up and you say, hey, I want a 1,000-watt light, and they go and grab you the light. Remember Diamond Lights in Berkeley? They used to wrap the lights in brown paper so that when you I don't know why they didn't just put them in fucking plain boxes, because the boxes, but they would wrap the lights in brown paper so when you walked out, you didn't have to walk out because they were in central San Rafael. Okay, so you're gonna walk out with a bunch of lights. Everybody fucking knew on the street. I'm sure the cops, were hip to it too. But
I mean, I should say this too. Like in Chicago, when we went to the grocery store, we
yeah,
were so concerned about police that we would hire a friend that had a clean household, and a clean life. So if they ran his license plate and then he got in trouble, and they used to do that with grocery stores on the West Coast too. People would be worried about getting their license plate written down. And so even just like going to a store was scary. So people would typically go in and go out and try to be quiet and try to be quick and try to get what they needed and leave. And I think what Gabby is saying is he's sort of like, when he was saying about like pioneering something or whatever, he was talking about like actually being conversational with the growers and building a little bit of a relationship and a little bit of trust
Which
and
is
getting a little deeper rather than like, huh?
which is a stark contrast to his extremely paranoid
it was good for me.
lifestyle.
It was so good
It
for
finally
me.
came out,
Yeah.
right? That makes a lot of sense.
And like I said, at that point, I wasn't growing because of it. I was like, all right, I'm not gonna grow because I'm working at the hydro store, and it's fucking heated to do that. You know, I was still paranoid.
Yeah.
you know, but yeah. So I learned at that point how much I loved talking to people about growing weed, and it wasn't just me teaching; it was also me learning. And particularly Francis came into my store, or Notsodog for the people that aren't, sure about that. But he came into my store and he was pretty knowledgeable on indoor cultivation. And, you know, talking to people, that's how you learn when, like, I mean, the books at that point were only getting you so far. You know what I mean? Like, being able to talk to someone about things, it was a critical way of learning. And the other thing is, like, beginners coming in, that they'd say, man, you know, like, I wanna grow some plants, but I don't know how to do it. Like, the fact that I would be there to be like, all right, here's the things you need to think about. You need to be able to keep that room cool. Okay, like if you put, you know, this 400 or 600 watt light in your closet, it's gonna get hot. How are we gonna get the air out of that? You know, and because I gave them that, you know, insight, they were able to feel confident enough to do it. And if you go to the other grow stores, it was more like, hey, I'll take, you know, one 600 watt light and this fertilizer, and like, that's it. You know, they were scared to talk. And the reason why they were scared to talk was valid. And we didn't talk about that, but it was because of Operation Green Merchant.
Yep.
And Operation Green Merchant, like, the DEA targeted grow shops,
Yep.
you know, and
That had just happened.
what'd you say?
That had just happened at that point as well.
Right.
'cause-
Well, you know,
Yes, there was a lot of
there
distrust.
was a little gap, but the OGs that had been there, it was still like fresh in their brain that this stuff had happened, and they were going to be super careful. And the way I felt about it was like, look, I mean, we just don't talk about weed, you know, and that's what we did. We just didn't talk about weed. We just talked about setting up and like, see, other grow stores, they would throw you out. Like, we would be, you know, we would throw people out if they pushed it, but generally we'd be like, yeah, you can't talk about growing weed here, you know, like, and then we would just talk about growing plants, you know, like, and, you know, so I opened, you know, we had this store in Roner Park, and then Slavic and I decided to expand, which, by the way, Notsodog used to drive from Mendocino County to Roner Park to shop at the Hydro Depot with me, and that's
He was
when
one
we,
of the people you were talking to.
yeah, he was one of the people that we were learning from each other, you know, and you know, so that's
I
when I
mean,
first met him.
this is really brief, but when
Don't be
I first
brief.
moved to California, the closest store was Berkeley Hydro, which meant I had to drive from Mendocino all the way into the East Bay, essentially, to go to a store. And so if you forgot something, that's another 6-hour round trip,
Yeah.
right? And then one of the people that worked in the Bay opened up a store in Novato. And then Slavic opened up a store in Ronet Park. And all of a sudden, instead of having to go all the way to the Bay, I just had to go to Sonoma County, right? And so it was kind of like,
So
it
Francis
was
just
even
said
like,
it wasn't because
stores
of me.
eventually became like every.
So it wasn't because of the good
Well, I mean, that's where I
conversation.
met.
It was
I mean, you know, but
convenience.
like you were the closest store. Well, I mean, that is how Gabby and I became friends, was talking at the store. And I mean, we told the story on a different podcast, but like one of my childhood best friends and I, we had such a good conversation with Gabby one day that I decided to leave him a joint on his windshield wiper
Oh.
with my number.
How romantic.
You know? And he was
Yeah.
The
he loved the
bromance has
weed. It was like
the
the Mendo
bromance
Perps, I
has
think.
lasted ever since.
Yeah.
That weed was just like,
And I left him a joint on his windshield with a note wrapped around the joint, you know. And then after work he called me that night, and then we had each other's numbers, and then we started chatting outside the store, and then we became friends, and then I went to his house, and then we exchanged cuts, and then quarter century later or whatever, we're still friends.
well, Francis, I don't want you to brush
So,
over it again
not
like
to
that
interrupt, but yeah.
quickly. No. I don't. I want you to interrupt. I like it when Francis tells a certain story, and like I want it documented in history. So even though it's been told before, but like that night when you had to make that call to me, like that you needed me to come to the shop to help
Yeah.
you out, I want you to tell that story.
Okay. I had this thing from General Hydroponics called an area flow, a hybrid aeroponic NFT style hydro system. And I broke this part, and we didn't have a part. And it was like the whole system is like a recirculating system. And so without this part, everything was going to fail. And I didn't know what to do. And so I called Gaby and I was like, dude, do you think you have an extra one at the store? And he was like, I think I do. And I'm like, can I convince you to open the store after hours and I'll make it worth your while? Well, go down there. We start
Francis,
getting.
I'm losing you. I'm losing your audio. I don't know what happened. You were like cutting in and
I was
out.
wondering about that.
Hold on.
It's been kind of delaying.
Can you guys hear me?
I hear you fine
Delaying?
now, but you were cutting
do
out
live
a
rural.
little bit.
Yeah.
Okay,
There was like a
just-
bunch of lag.
Okay. Well, anyway, I had this, and I convinced Gaby to go to the
hey,
store after
Francis.
hours, let me in, and sell me. No.
You should log out and then log back in. Maybe it'll be better.
I will.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a bathroom break real quick.
Alrighty.
I'm gonna ask a
No. I was
flowering
gonna say,
time
Caleb.
question
I
right
thought you were.
quick.
I thought you were gonna try to leave. I was like, Caleb, you're going
No
nowhere.
way.
You've been fucking so silent over there,
For 3
just getting
hours.
really high.
Yeah. So all those bag seeds that you collected from Dead Lot and you popped them and you gave all of them lady names and like what was the flowering time range of all those things that came up? And
Nothing was really long.
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you that. Like none of them were like sativas. I was looking for broadleaf indica at the time, and that's what Francine was. And I think everything was like 60 days or less. So, because that was one of the things that was important. Like we didn't feel like we could grow, and the pith and the haze scene became really big in New York, but that was after I left. So when I was there, like we were trying to grow stuff that was going to stay shorter, so we stayed away from those sativas and longer stuff.
Did you ever find any seeds from that Big Sur Holy Haze or Big Sur Holy Skunk?
I can't say that I did. No. And
Was that like a rarity, or was that just because it was such small quantities, like true sensimilla? In a time where...
I actually used to get a lot of that herb, but there wasn't seed in it.
Am I back? Can you hear me?
I hear you better now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I live rural, so I apologize. Maybe the internet was temporarily something. So anyway, I don't know what you guys could hear, but I'll try to be brief.
Don't be brief.
I had this area flow, which was a full hydro system, and I lost this specialized piece. Not lost. Something broke or it cracked or something, and so I called Gaby all panicked, and I asked him if he had the piece, and he said he did, and then I asked him if I could convince him to meet me at the store after hours and let me in and give me this critical piece that I needed. He agreed. Me and my friend Sean went down there, and because we were there, we started grabbing other things we needed, and so we were chatting and talking and smoking and all this, and then I end up with this big armful of stuff. And as I'm leaving, I have the piece the only thing that I needed really was on top, and that thing slipped off my pile, hit the concrete, and shattered. And so I'm holding this giant amount of stuff that I sort of got like as an afterthought. And the one thing that was absolutely critical, I lost. And he didn't have an extra one, so we shattered it. So then Sean and I had to go home, MacGyver style, and figure out how we could like glue, repair, fix temporarily that piece so that my whole crop didn't die. It was.
You said hydroponic system, but people may not know that what he means is they were tubes that had water running through them or fertilizer, and that was it. The roots were growing in the tubes. So like,
Yeah, they were full water culture.
yeah.
And like
So
back then that was pretty advanced system, and it was the whole thing was circulated. So like there was a tank, and it sprayed water in jets into the tubes, and it would run in a thin film back into the thing. And I lost a piece that was needed to keep it sealed and functioning, or I broke a piece. Yeah, I think Sean broke it actually, but
oh,
whatever.
you're gonna
And
blame? Sean is gone. He
I
passed
mean, I
away,
don't want to say
and
blame.
and
It's just,
Dom
this
is
is what happened.
Sean Francis is blaming the dead guy.
Damn. It
Like
was
that's
his fault.
fucked up, bro.
It was. I mean,
That might,
the
granted
piece that
nothing. We just leave it at that. You blame the dead guy.
I did.
That's fine.
The piece that I
So
needed,
what?
I broke.
Let him rest in peace. He broke it. So
He
you're
broke
still
it.
holding the grudge.
He broke
I mean,
it.
I'm actually glad that it got broken because, like, it seemed like even though we had met previously, that was the night that like we really connected and became like friends forever. That's like the way I see it. It was like
Yeah.
on that night, like we ended up making this
Well,
connection. that lasted
there's
for many years.
also a slightly different take on that is that Sean and I also, Gabby had these water cooled lights in his store in the window, and they removed like 95% of the heat. So you could literally walk up to like the light and grab the bulb. I mean, it had water sheath around it, and it was like, it was touchable, right? And so Sean and I bought some of these things, and then they didn't fit in any. They were Australian, and they didn't fit in any American hoods. And so we ended up trying to talk to Gabby about these things, and we broke a couple of them, and they were expensive. And then they were from Australia, and so we were trying to get like the Australian technical support online, but they're literally on the other side of the earth, so they were like only open from like very strange hours. We had to call them like after 11 p.m. our time to catch them, or like we had to get up at 5 in the morning or something before they closed. And so yeah, I don't know, we had a couple random instances of meeting at the stores and stuff, and we had shared interests, and I shared some weed, and then we started talking, and then we met after hours, and then we had each other's numbers, and we just kept talking, and friendship was born, type of thing, and
It's beautiful. What
Yeah.
year was that?
It was
2001,
yeah, maybe 2000, 2000
maybe
or
2000,
2001.
maybe
The
2000.
Garden Spout we opened in 2002.
And that
So
was at
it was
Slavics.
like, well, no, the Garden Spout was 2002. That was
Yeah, but I
me.
mean, like that
Right.
story was at
Exactly.
Slavics, which was
Yeah.
prior, so
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. So how many years were you working at the store before that?
Me or
Yeah,
You.
Gabby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think only like a year. I
Okay.
like when he met me in Roner Park. I don't even think I was working there for a year. It might have been like 6 months.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and I'm not exact. It must have been like 1999 to 2000, somewhere in there.
Yeah. So, but
So-
you were cultivating between like sounds like 90. I mean, cultivating in California between like 93 and 99,
91 and 99.
91 and 99. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Tough
well,
years.
it might have been like January of 92.
Yeah.
January
Tough
92.
years in terms of general kind of enforcement and stuff like that going on.
I mean, I never had a problem, so like, I was super careful, and I never had a problem with law enforcement, with my grows. So that's part of the reason why I was like, when I read what Caleb sent me, I was like, man, I wonder if I belong in this study. I was like, I really want to be, but like, I was like, I wonder if I belong, because like, I never had the problems with law enforcement and cannabis.
They just call it
like,
occupational hazard.
yeah.
Right.
Like if you're a miner, you might get black lung. If
But
you
it
like carpet.
affected like how you did things.
Yeah, for sure. I used to go to San Francisco to sell my weed.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So like, even though it's an indirect structural sort of incentive field that you're operating in.
I mean, that's just to interject really quick. I should say that like how people grew and what ways that they grew was vastly because
Yeah.
of varying levels of government pressure.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
in you know, lore around here or whatever is like in the 70s before helicopters flew, one of the things that made like Mendocino or Humboldt or Trinity or like say the mountains of Santa Cruz like attractive is that you could grow in the hills where nobody was going to put eyes on it, and it was sort of out of sight, and people would grow big sativa plants and they didn't really care how long they took, you know, and they would grow in the full sun. And you know, and then when sort of like the, for lack of a better term, when the Reagan drug war sort of took off
Yeah.
and camps started flying and helicopters started going around looking for it, you know, I mean, there's a famous story up here, like the first garden they cut down when camps started flying, they used chainsaws because the stalks were so giant at the base.
Yeah.
But then very quickly, once a bunch of people got busted, then people realized, oh, I need to grow small plants. I need to grow them in the bushes. I need to grow inside. The whole indoor thing was primarily a response to police pressure,
Yeah.
you know? And, you know, police pressure got intense enough in Santa Cruz and in Mendo and Humboldt and all that kind of stuff. You know, they sent in the National Guard in certain instances and stuff like that. It got really rough. And so people started going indoors so it wasn't seen, you know, and that you could get away with it. And it dramatically changed the type of plants that were grown, right? Who, like, how long they took, how much, like, you used to be able to be like, okay, I don't care if I get these like big sativa, loose cola type things, you know? And then once police pressure hit, you wanted something that was shorter, that was denser, that would finish faster, because that was a lot less risk. Like when I got to Mendo, I think I mentioned it briefly, but it was a lot of like tree line growing, bushes growing, small patches trying to get away with it type of thing. I mean, most of the grows that Gaby was talking about, like for indoor, were 2 lighters or 4 lighters or 6 lighters, small, you know, side bedroom style, or maybe a room in your garage type of thing. I mean, there was bigger stuff, but you know, innovation, like even like when Mendocino County started its like medical 25 plant program, well, that led people to being like, well, how can I get the biggest 25 plants I can possibly get? Because that's the safety of it, right?
You
And
remember
so,
when that happened?
yeah, early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
We used to have a that program I was telling you about that I was a member of, you know, like vetted through the county health department and stuff. They used to do this thing where the sheriff would give out yellow zip ties
Yeah.
with numbers on each one of them, you know, and you could go down to the sheriff and you could get these numbered zip ties, and then you would put the zip tie around the base of your plant, and that way if you did get raided or something happened by the sheriff, there would be an indication that you were part of the program,
Yeah.
and that you'd gone through the hoops, you know what I mean, and this was a medical garden and not just like an illegal garden. So there was a lot, there's a lot. Huh?
Was the 25 plants attached to the zip tie program? Is
Yeah.
that what it was? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
There used to be this thing called Measure G that was basically made Mendocino County the most liberal county in America to grow,
Yeah.
you know? And we had a district attorney named Norm Vroman here then that basically made a delineation between commercial size grows and mom and pop type stuff, just trying to like survive and small scale. So he just wouldn't prosecute things that he thought were small to medium sized and not really pushing boundaries.
Yeah.
And that created a green rush, which is like when Gaby opened his store in Mendo. The amount of customers he had was just unbelievable, because all kinds of people were sort of flocking to Mendocino County because it had you know, a more permissive environment than other places. And I should say there that, like, you know, way earlier in this convo, when I was talking about going to Amsterdam, most of the stuff in Amsterdam was stuff from the west coast of California, or the west coast, California, Seattle, Oregon, what have you. different places, but that fled to Holland, not because Holland was a great place to grow. It was actually pretty awful climate wise, but it had a permissive it had a permissive structure where it was like they had a loophole where it was technically legal to make seeds,
Yeah.
right? And so whether you want to talk about like, Sam, like all these different breeders would bring their stuff escaping prohibition to Holland. That was
That's 100%
essentially
correct. Yes.
that was essentially like all the stuff that came over there. And even some of the breeders like Sam Skunkman, I think he got in trouble a couple of times. And after the second time, he had some young kids and he had a wife, and they decided to go somewhere they wouldn't be persecuted.
Yep.
And so police pressure and like the type of pressure they applied really had a massive impact on the other side of things, how we did things, why we did things, what size we did, what we thought was like bold to get away with. And people would come to Mendo and think that it was like legal.
Right.
But the weird part about it is that like 215 might have made it legal, but it also just left a giant gray area of interpretation. And so there was this cat and mouse game between law enforcement and us that was always changing. And you could get a law enforcement member that would show up and look at your stuff and be like, okay, this is normal. I'm not stressed about it. You guys are fine. Or you could get a different law enforcement guy that had been busting weed people his whole life and didn't even like the changes and was like, you know what? I'm going to arrest you. And even if you think you're right, you can just play that out in court. But I'm still taking you to jail, And so people thought it was like sort of cut and dried rather than very much up to the individual cop or person.
Right.
Type of thing. And so I always felt like living in Mendo, you had a much different take on like what was permissible and what you could get away with and what the dynamic was versus outsiders that would just show up and be like, I hear 25 is legal and you can do whatever you want. And you're kind of like, well, not, I mean, because like it's what's funny about the law is that we might look at the law and be like, here's where it bends. Right? And comps might look at the law and be like, here's where I can bend it. So there's bending happening on both sides, and it was very much a gray area. And, and there was people that were like, there was people like me that were fully invested in the system and like tried to do the right thing. Right. And there was people that bent the rules a whole bunch and tried to use the rules to get away with it. I mean, just like normal humanity, right? Like everybody looks at what the structure is and tries to figure out where they fit in or what they think they can do type of thing. And so what's funny about it is police pressure had a giant impact on cannabis genetics, what was grown. Like in the 70s, it was almost all sativas or blends of sativas. After 10 years of intense camp and political pressure, it was mostly indicas with some sativas blended in because they were denser, shorter flowering, quicker, easier to hide in the bushes, all that different types of thing. And so, I guess like in evolution or whatever you would call it, like, environmental pressure or something like that, like how evolution occurs and like the different things. Well, in this case, it was like police pressure and then people making breeding decisions and growing decisions based on the reality of where they were. So like to expand on that for a second, if you're only an indoor guy, you might want some short, squat, fast flowering indicas that don't get tall, that don't get out of the way, that yield a nice amount, really chunky, pretty fast. But if you're an outdoor guy, pure indicas you don't want something that's only going to end up being 3 or 4 feet tall, even in the full sun, and super leafy and super bushy. So a lot of times people would try to blend the two outdoor because they wanted some of that sativa stretch. They wanted it to get bigger. They wanted it to like have, because, when you get bigger, you get more bud sites, more places for flower to form, more flower, better. And so there was always this breeding was massively impacted by what people thought they could get away with and where for decades. In the
Yeah.
70s, it was sort of freewheeling because they weren't really looking for it. And then in the 80s and 90s, when they were looking for it really hard, dramatically affected people's decisions.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, is that where both of you come in the 90s into this bigger story, you come in at a time when it's tough,
Yeah, very much so.
and you navigated that.
I mean, there were certain things that were tough, but when you think about it with perspective, it was also way easier. You know, I mean, I was getting 6,400 a pound, you know, like for all my weed. And I would get like maybe 4 or 5 pounds every couple of months, but that
So
translates to a lot, you know?
one thing I should
And
say
so like
too is like,
today growers, hold on, let me just finish this.
oh,
Today growers have it tough.
Yeah.
That, you know, like they're not able to get even $1,000 a pound for indoors, and, you know, light depths are $350, or it's just like, that's tough, you know, 6,400 a pound. Like nobody's gonna like cry, you know, let me cry on their shoulder about it.
I mean, and what's wild about that is that you're thinking about that in terms of like 2025 money. But if you go online and there's like a thing you can look up, inflation calculator, where it shows you the value of a certain amount of money in a certain year. If you were to put that number he just said into the inflation
I'll do it.
calculator in like 1992, I bet it comes out to like 14 or 15 grand.
I'm doing it as we
You're
speak.
doing it as we
Yeah.
speak. Yeah,
Yeah.
type in 6,400 in 1992
Yeah.
and see what pops up.
Yeah.
How much is it worth in
It's
2025?
it's an insane amount of money.
Like the amount of inflation that's happened just in my adult lifetime is giant.
Yeah.
It's really accelerated.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
accelerating.
it really is accelerated, and it's going quick too, even today. So it's like it's hard to throw out numbers like that because you like apply it to today's number, but it's even crazier. What did you come up with, Gabby?
$14,778.
I mean, I guess 15 grand just off the top of my
Yeah.
head, but I wasn't too far
You
off.
knew.
You know,
You
so
knew.
yeah. So imagine you're Gabby in your whatever your 20s, and you're getting 3 or 4 pounds, but each pound is worth 14 grand in today's money. Yeah, 14.7, you know, almost 15. So it's like, yeah, like some one little bedroom sized indoor
Yeah.
all is plenty of Grateful Dead shows and organic food and going to a crunchy co-op and buying the nice stuff and you know, all that. So
So
and
there
that's
was
part of
parts
like
of it that were easy.
so that's what I was telling you before about like Mean Gene, like when we were talking about like if you got in the 90s, if you pulled off 20 pounds of outdoor,
Yeah.
like and
You
I
know,
mean we weren't getting 6,400 for it, but like even if you were getting less, like that was enough to like that was a good lifestyle.
Yeah.
That was enough for everyone to pay for what they had going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of like in a way, this might sound strange, but like did you know how there was a one of the first forums was called Overgrow?
Yeah.
Do you know what the concept of overgrow is?
Yeah. Overgrow the government.
Yeah, basically it was like enough civil disobedience. Because the thing about laws is that laws really only work if they have significant buy-in from the population.
Yeah.
If you have laws that get like one of the reasons they got rid of alcohol prohibition was not only the corruption and the social damage, but the fact that 80% of America was like, this is some bull, I'm going to break the law.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to have laws where they didn't want to start people with just like disregarding, you know?
Yeah.
And
I think
so
we still need to overgrow the government, by the way. Like,
well, yeah, the thing is that the way I look at it is that the fight hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
Like I put it really simply. My whole life they've been like, you can't have it, you can't have it, this is evil, this is bad, you're a terrible person for doing it. You know, you have mental problems, you know, you're scummy, whatever. And then they've shifted to like, this thing you've got is pretty cool. Maybe we'll take it from here.
Yeah.
You know? And so the fight isn't over by any means. Like I don't even think legalization exists, to be honest.
Well, I mean, you have to define the term, don't you?
Well, let me put it this way. I can't think of something else that's legal that I'm not allowed to like share with any one of you on this podcast right now.
I mean, nuclear waste.
But that's
But
not
we're not
legal.
allowed
That's
to
super
have it.
restricted.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no one can like go to a store and buy nuclear waste, you know, or anything.
No, you can't.
I just mean like the thing about like if you take like for instance like heirloom vegetables,
Sure.
which didn't really become popular until like sort of like the co-op revolution and like the little organic store type of thing, but in that tiny subculture that preserved all these heirlooms, they were able to grow as many tomatoes or squashes or this or that as they wanted. They were able to save seeds. They were able to trade seeds. They were able to trade fruits and vegetables and all kinds of stuff amongst enthusiasts. No one cared.
Yeah.
Alcohol is
Because
legal.
it's food. Because
Alcohol
it's
is, yeah,
food.
but alcohol is legal and
Yeah.
it's restricted by age and this and that. But I
And
can
that's
have a
the issue.
giant bar at my
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
I can be driving home with a trunk full of hard liquor that I legally bought.
Yeah.
And there's not like an amount cap, you know, there's not a this. I can mail it. I can mail you a nice bottle of wine
Yeah.
for your birthday if you wanted, Dominic, and no one would get mad at it.
No.
So it's like it's like that's why I really don't think it's legal in the sense that it's like, you know, if you know anything about plants, allowing people to have 6 plants is not allowing hobby breeders. It's not
Yeah.
allowing hobbyists of any kind. It's not even allowing people to like grow out some seeds and see what's going on. You can ban commercial activity if you want, because that's, you know, business licenses and this and that and what have you. But like it's only legal in this extremely restricted way where it's like they've set it up where they sort of want you, if you want to use it, to go through these channels that they're all profiting from. And that's made a bunch of distortions in the marketplace. I mean, not to get political for a second, but like most of the time when you legalize and you eliminate a black market, the price goes down and the quality goes up because you remove a bunch of inefficiencies, you know, and cost. Weed legalization might be the first time where the cost stays high and the quality goes down.
Right. But the I think the distinction here is that like cannabis is regulated like it is a drug means like heroin, right? Like cocaine, like
Well, it's
you know,
illegal at the federal level still
yeah,
too.
yeah,
So it's only like these state by state experiments.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And it only applies to theoretically closed supply chains from seed
Yes.
to consumer. Uh,
Yes.
theoretically. So so like when you define legalization as the carving out of an exception, essentially through the a regulated supply chain, there's legalization, but like that's why I always say legalization with, not after prohibition. Like it's a carved out exception that's geographically like distributed across space, but usually in a lot more complex way than people think about, because states aren't homogenous, and like different regions and different areas, in jurisdictions across states, completely monkey wrench, the dream of a functioning market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically like on a lot of levels, it's like a failure waiting to happen that's propped up by investor money and other various. I mean, because like I study ag a bit, right? Like no, I'm not going to sit here and claim I'm some expert or something like that. But one of the things you notice about America is that America is really good at growing crops where the climate suits the crop,
Yeah.
right? Like why are Idaho and potatoes synonymous? Because it has a great climate and an area, and they've decided that growing potatoes there makes a lot of sense. Why is Orange County in Southern California named Orange County, or why was Florida famous for oranges? Because the climate for citrus there is better. There's no New York citrus. They just import their citrus. They grow winter wheat in Montana. There's a place in California, Monterey County, that's basically spring all year long, And so they provide something crazy like 65% of the entire nation's lettuce and certain spring veggies, just because it's so convenient to do it there, you know? And so by this state by state model, it's not really like figuring out where the climate suits the plant and doing it there. It's like which state is effective, which county is being more liberal than other counties,
So
which tax scheme.
it's a metaphorical climate, basically. The cultural climate where like there will be licensing, like Humboldt County, right? Like the cultural climate here for legalization, you know, supported it in a certain way. Does that make sense, or did I just throw?
No, that I mean I was involved in the legal side of the market, like in terms of working for companies that were doing that kind of stuff, and so I've been to a bunch of like supervisor. You know, in California we tried to give local control, so it's like there's state law, and then there's county law, and then there's municipalities, and then there's all these different layers, and they can be more restrictive, they can ban, they can be very liberal, and so typically we've developed things in places that have been more liberal. Like not liberal politically, just like more, you know, more open to bigger, more open to whatever. And so there's a lot of weird inefficiencies. I mean, the other thing, you know, that really bums me out is like when we had to grow in the hills, right? Because that's where we could get away with it. The hills were a lot cleaner.
Yep.
When they decided to move us back into ag land typically has lots of chems that have been applied over the decades that are specifically banned in cannabis testing.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. There's a lot of land that farmers are like, oh, I want you to get on my ag land and we want to start a farm. And then it's like you test the soil and there's like 9 different things in there that aren't copacetic with cannabis testing.
Yeah.
And some of those things, do you know what a POP is?
No, what's a POP?
It's a persistent organic pollutant.
Yeah.
So the most famous one is like DDT,
Ah.
right? That's like the most famous one, but there's other ones. And so some of these POP, the reason why they call them persistent, because they're persistent, right? So some of these things have been banned, but they're still present in the soil, and they probably will be for another 20 or 30 years.
Right.
And if you have a POP, like most chemicals that are banned for cannabis, they have a pass-fail level.
Yep.
But the POPs, any amount detected is a fail.
Yep.
So I was working with this group in New York trying to develop a property, and they tested positive for DDT.
Yeah.
I had to look up when DDT was banned. It was banned in 1972,
Yeah.
which is older than me. But it was still popping hot for DDT. So this dude's grandfather sprayed some DDT on his land back when it was legal, growing whatever veggies he was growing, and that was totally fine.
It's industrial agriculture.
Yeah, and 50 years later,
Yeah.
it's still. There was a place I worked at in Santa Barbara where there was this POP called Chlorodan, right?
Yeah.
Chlorodan was banned in 1987, but their soil still tests hot for it because it has a half-life of 50 years.
Yeah.
So even just moving, like do you know who Harborside is?
Yeah. Of course.
Anyway, Harborside is they're sort of like a little evil empire-ish or whatever, but they were one of the people that pushed for the stacking of licenses, right? And the reason why they did that is they had an 11-acre spot in Salinas that they wanted to blow up and grow a lot of cannabis on. And what they found is that there was an orchard next to them, and that orchard would do aerial spraying for their orchard. And they would spray things that were completely legal to spray on their orchard, but were banned in cannabis. And then their intake fans would suck air in, right?
Yeah.
And they contaminated all their cannabis, even just from aerial drift.
Yep.
So there's a weird dynamic with modern ag versus cannabis, because cannabis typically they want it to be a lot cleaner, and they have very few things that are approved for use.
Yep.
And that's problematic when you're going to try to grow in ag land surrounded by farms and places that are going to be using things that are not compatible with your testing regime.
Yeah, so like it's ultimately kind of almost impossible to get outdoor cannabis into ag land.
It's not impossible, but it's a lot tougher.
You could do it in pots above ground.
Yeah.
I mean, even like, but I'll tell you, like when I worked in Santa Barbara, the dust was the enemy. Because if like you drove in like a 4x4, like an ATV or like a vehicle on the farm, you had to go really slow. We had to end up having to like gravel all of it. Because if you kicked up the dust and the wind blew the dust on the plant and the dust had banned chemicals on it, well then your stuff could test hot even if you never sprayed it.
Yeah. So I have a suggestion, and that is to
That is to freeze.
this time. And I was thinking maybe Caleb could ask some questions.
I think that would be great. People were wondering if Caleb speaks.
I asked Aph a question earlier. I can continue that same train of thought. I guess the clones that you brought, Notsodog, the Crystal Chunk and the Maui, how long did they take to flower?
The Maui was done in about 55 to 60, low 60s.
Excuse me, are we getting a weird echo?
Probably from Caleb, maybe. I don't know. Yep, there it goes. 55 to 60, 63 days, 8 to 9 weeks. And the Maui was about the same, roughly speaking. I mean, that's kind of like, that's something that maybe we could talk about a little bit where, when you're growing indoor, it was all about how many cycles you could get a year. And so people often wanted to do shorter flowering things, ideally, because that would enable them to get an extra cycle or two. If you have something that takes 56 days, you can get 5 rips a year. If you have something that takes 50 or 45, you could maybe get as many as 8, right? But if you have something that's 70 or 80, maybe you only get 4. If you have a long-running sativa, maybe you can only get 3. Like when people talk about like, the haze that was famous in certain like in certain parts of New York or Florida or whatever else, like if you were to take it the full, 98 days or 100 days or whatever, you might only be able to get 3 crops in a year. Where if I was growing Maui, I could do 5 easily, even with a little bit of downtime. And so that's kind of like what I was talking about before, although I didn't mention it specifically, on like how breeding was massively impacted by prohibition. People wanted things that were fast. Gaby and I used to look at some of the catalogs and be like, imagine if we just got something that was just unbelievably good and it only took 45 days, dude, 6 weeks. If we could get a 6-weeker, because some of the stuff in there in those old catalogs would say 45, 50 days. And we were like, man, if we could find a 45-day winner, oh my God, we would just be like, 6 weeks instead. Now it turns out that most of the herb that I like tends to be 9 or 10 weeks. Well, there's some that's shorter and there's some that faster, but a lot of it tends to be that long. But there was a big push to have shorter, faster, chunkier, easier to trim, all these different production values that went into it that mattered. There was times when people might throw something away because, there's people today I talk to that's like, they're like, my program is a 9-week program. So anything that takes longer than 63 days doesn't work for me, or I cut it early. Because that's the program I'm on. And so, that's just another factor. Now it turns out too, for me, that it seems like certain characteristics seem to take longer to develop. Like some of the shorter flowering things, they tend not to be as potent, or they tend to have a certain kind of high. Or like if you want some of that, like more like psychedelic, up, energetic, potency, it seems like it takes that longer to develop and flowering. You don't seem to find it in the shorter things. All the stuff that I've seen that's taken a really short amount of time. I mean, there's a couple exceptions, but in general, it tends to be weaker, a different type of high. Not bad in a say, just different, you know? And so, you know, there's also, there's something to be said too for like a lot of the fads that happened in the past were consumer driven, where consumers wanted something and then growers figured out how to get that something and then give it to them, whether that was sour diesel or whether that was Kush, whether that was purple Urkel, you know, these different types of things. And now with legalization, people are trying, farmers, because times are tough, they're trying to find plants that fit their production model. And then hopefully they're good enough that they can hype them into being really elites. Because almost every phenomenal plant from like the medical, the 215 or the earlier era had significant production problems. But
Hey,
it might be amazing smoke, but it has some significant drawbacks that if it was like applied to like legalization and financial pressures, it probably wouldn't have made the cut.
hey, Notsodog, just let me interrupt 1 second. Hey, Caleb, I want you to do me a favor and I want you to disconnect and then rejoin. And then try to be careful about changing your audio source. Because I saw you had unplugged your headphones. But when you do that, sometimes it makes the recording on Riverside have an issue because you changed your source in the middle. And then that can make the transcript have a problem. So it might not be able to like you might, anyway, just log out and then log back on. And then keep your audio source the same throughout the podcast. So just do it real quick, and then you can get back and ask your next question. I don't think that talking about lighting today is going to happen, but we'll certainly do it again. We'll get Wolf Siegel to join us because he is an expert on lighting. And one thing I want to say, Dom, Wolf, if you know, if you're into it, which I think you will be, Wolf wants to do the study with us, and he wants to do it live with us, and he's ready to do it next week. So if you have time, same time next week, I'd like to make this like, you know, the next segment. You know, I mean,
Sounds good.
I
Yeah.
I can listen to Wolf's stories forever. You know.
Yeah, I have before.
Yeah. But you know what? I
Yeah.
mean, I bet you haven't heard them all. You
No, no,
know,
no,
because
no.
he's got
I can
endless
use
stories. You know.
I can use a total refresher as well.
So
And we could
anyway,
also do this. We could also do this in a couple parts because it
Yeah,
seems like we could talk for a long time.
right.
And I
yeah,
don't know how long.
We're not gonna finish the Gabby and not so thing
yeah,
today. And I
yeah.
hope it's
No, we're
okay that
not.
we did it together.
Yeah,
But
And eventually, my throat will hurt, and my
yeah,
kids will
oh,
start blowing me up from
stop,
school and stuff.
stop
And
crying.
yeah,
I
yeah.
cry. You know, I try to get in
Well,
touch with my feelings.
I think we have to let Caleb and Dominic just ask more questions instead of
Sure.
us just talking on the
I
couch
think they
telling our
like us
stories.
talking, but they
Yeah,
can.
Definitely.
But you
that
know,
is true.
I just
Yeah,
want to make sure that like we do something that's
yeah.
worthy to be in this study, you
Oh,
know,
for sure.
because
Listen, like the amazing geographies that you've been talking about here are all super relevant, and part of like the pattern of stories that people have told about places and how genetic building blocks moved around. You know, so it's been very, very rich actually, and so um,
you know, I think
that's what I
something that
wanted
we
to
haven't
notice.
done, I think something that we haven't done that I think is really important is actually describe what we are doing here. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like you have that webinar that you did, but maybe you could briefly say like, you know, better than, you know, this thing that I read
Um,
earlier, you know, tell
well, I
people
mean,
how to find out about you guys and
okay, yeah. It was part of a research project that's funded by the California Department of Cannabis Control. Um, and actually, what this is the same sort of process that I go through for doing interviews with people not in public, right? I have about 100 people to interview, and have been doing that for over a year now. And actually, we'll be wrapping it up in the next month or so. But basically, it's just the stories of people and their places and their plants. You know, like where'd they go? You know, what were the different things that influenced what they were doing and where they wanted to go, and you know where their plants went. How the genetics traveled around. They weren't stationary. And the relationship between that and like law enforcement pressure, obviously. So this interview is what I'm doing, right, in terms of the project, and it's going to tell two geographic stories. One is
I mean, in a lot of ways too, because a lot of those breeders and a lot of those guys with seeds escaped from America to Amsterdam.
Yep.
And then they started selling seeds in Amsterdam.
Yep.
And then people like me and thousands of others went to Amsterdam and got seeds and then went back to whatever part of the country they were from, whether it was Chicago or New York or Florida or back to California or Indiana or Connecticut or what have you. Then they took those seeds and they started growing them there. And then that story started there again and got spread around. Like, so for instance, I could really briefly, like, obviously OG Kush is a pretty famous strain, right? Well, that's a marriage essentially of these guys in Florida got this cut from Seattle, okay, that was from my area, and all they knew about it was from my area, so it was called the Emerald Triangle. They didn't know anything else about it.
They thought Seattle was near the Emerald Triangle?
No, it was from the Emerald Triangle.
Oh, okay.
And it made its way up to Seattle.
Yep.
And then from there, somehow these guys in Florida got it from Seattle.
Yep.
And then they went to Amsterdam and they got seeds from Neville. And then they came back and they grew those seeds from Neville in a room with the Emerald Triangle. And an accidental pollination happened. And then some guys got a hold of these bag seeds out of this bag of weed, grew them up, took it to LA, and it became OG Kush. So it's like OG Kush is like a random unknown strain from my area, crossed with could have been 6 or 7 different strains from Europe, but they probably also came to America, from America to Holland and then back over to America. And so that movement of, even if you were getting stuff from Amsterdam, there wasn't anything native from Amsterdam. It was all mostly stuff that was developed in America, brought over there, sold there for some time, and then went back over,
Yep. And also to other parts of the world, besides the United States, which is kind of like California genetics. Ultimately, they're global, like truly global. At this point, the Californica hybridicus, like this is great. Caleb.
Yeah. So thanks so much for talking about that like description of how the preference for shorter flowering and the breeding like struck even in guerrilla growing times just as much as it did in the indoor growing times. And like, do either of y'all know any people that like resisted that trend and continued to go for like the longer flowering stuff? Maybe in a separate room. Were they able to get more per pound? Like, say the 10-weeker that you liked, were you able to get 20% more than an 8-weeker? Or would that just all go to head stash?
I would say, like, there's a people are how people are. Like, we don't change that much generation to generation. So there's this article, I don't know where it is, I have it saved on my computer somewhere, of Sam Skunkman writing about how most people in cannabis are in it for the money. They just want what's easy and quick and fast. They don't care about lineage. They don't care about genetics. They don't care about this, that, or whatever. And he was ranting about how there's only a small percentage of people that really care, right? And he wrote that in 1980. Okay, so I think in general, the vast majority of people that have been in it for a long time have always had some sort of risk reward, you know, inherent in it. And then there's always been a smaller group of people that, you know, cared about the lineage, cared about the genetics, was willing to grow some weird stuff. Most people want to grow what's already popular and easy to sell, you know, and but you don't know what's going to be popular next. So it's always been kind of this weird thing where it's like popularity is bubbled up from different places, you know, and now we're in this like quasi legalization thing where everyone's trying to fit stuff into a production model. We might have broken a little bit like all of the unique little people doing stuff that just so happen to have the next famous thing that they don't know is going to be famous bubble up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, so it's always been, there's always been a certain amount of pressures and stuff like that, you know. So I got my kids are texting me.
Well, if you gotta go, Francis.
I do have to go soon, but I mean, that's why I was kind of suggesting maybe we could do it in a couple of batches, because we've probably been on this since roughly 9 a.m. and it's almost 1. You know what I mean? And so like, you know, like, I mean, I'm down to give 8 hours to it if need be, but it might have to be in like 2 or 3 segments, if that makes sense.
I support that.
You support that?
Same.
I do think 4 hours is probably about the max that, like, that I can take at a time.
Well, do you want to do a thing where we just schedule like a phase 2,
Yeah.
and maybe amongst each other? Like,
Yep.
I mean, Gaby obviously has both of your contacts. We can communicate like stuff we didn't get to, stuff you'd like to get to in the next one. We could like bounce around some topics,
Yep.
you know, like so that like we could jog memories and stuff like that of like where you want it to go or places you think it missed.
Yep.
Does that seem good?
That seems like a great idea. Let's do that.
Okay,
Great.
because I mean, I don't want to like end it abruptly or anything like that, but we've probably been 4 hours deep.
Yeah.
3 hours and 47 minutes almost.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I will say that so right now we have 245 people listening live, and I'd like to thank every one of you.
Always.
And we had over 300 people. I think like 306 was our peak. So it's one of the best we've ever. Oh my God, Mr. Spliff, I love this guy. Check out Mr. Spliff of Cannabis.
Well, let's just say that we'll do a part 2 soon.
Yeah, we'll
I
schedule it.
can.
We'll schedule it, and we'll do it again. One thing I would like to say before we go is, first, I would like to make an invitation to anyone that's still doing Dominic's study, Dominic and Caleb, that if they want to do it, you know, live and have it be broadcasted here, we'd love to do it. I want people to tell their stories, you know, and, you know, obviously if you're going to say stuff that you think is going to incriminate you and, you know, that's, you know, if you don't want to do it and you want it to be private, I understand. But anyone that wants to do it, you know, live on the show, we would love to do that. Notsodog and I will try to shut up and let you tell your story.
I can shut up.
But yeah, no, I know. We could have made you shut up too. I just love your stories. So, but yeah, like this is something that I've been telling people. And so even outside of this study, I've been telling people, record your story, send it to me, and I'll post it. Because we can't interview everybody, right? But if we're a place where people can come and tell their stories, you know, it has a much bigger impact.
Yep.
You know, like I tell a story about how, and you know, something I want to do is make a show about medical patients and how it's improved their lives. And so I searched online, and it's really hard. If you search for medical marijuana saved my life, you're going to have a hard time finding a bunch of videos. And then when you find the video, they've got like such a small amount of views.
Yeah.
So my thought was, if there's one place where people post their videos about, their weed stories and how cannabis saved their life, then more people see it, because once they see one, they're directed to the next one, and they see that there's 50 stories here, and then it can blow up. So, like I said, this is a place where everyone can tell their story.
My kids are blowing me up, so I probably have to
Bye,
go.
buddy.
And I'm so jealous of Dominic eating off camera here because I'm starving. No, you don't have to apologize
I
at
ate
all,
a
dude.
slice
That's
of bread.
I'm like, whatever. I'm like,
I
I'm
ran
like at
inside
the
and ate
point,
a slice
I
of
need
bread.
some water. I need some calories. I need to pick one of my kids up from school. But I would love to do this again soon. And and everyone's time, it was pretty fun. Everyone was listening. I hope it was enjoyable. And so the other part about it is too, is like, yeah, I'll talk to Dominic and Caleb, and we'll get some more like questions, the things they don't think we got to, or directions they might want to go in, you know, things they might want to ask now that we've done an initial thing. And we'll go from there. Yeah, we got to get Caleb talking more significantly.
Yeah.
But I have to go. So Gabby, when I hop off, do you want me to leave it open so it uploads?
Yes. And that's
I will.
something that Caleb and Dominic, when we hang up, leave Riverside, that browser open till it says that you're 100% uploaded. Because right now the stuff is being saved on.
Well, I don't want to be
on your
abrupt,
phones.
but I'm going to hop off.
Bye, brother. I love you.
Peace, buddy. Love you too.
Bye.
Oh, man. Not so dad. That was a funny comment. Well, once again, can you guys share those links and, where people can find that workshop that you did and other stuff? So if they're dying to get more information about what you guys are doing before our next podcast, they can find that?
Yep.
Well, just give us the information and Caleb type it out.
Yeah.
What?
The website is legacygenetics.org. Legacygenetics.org. And you can reach me at dc285 at humboldt.edu. And Caleb, you want to say yours?
My email is cyc13@humboldt.edu.
Well, for me, it's been a complete honor to do this with you guys. I really appreciate you inviting me to do it.
It's
And
been so fun. Thank you
and
for suggesting it. I think it's great.
yeah, I mean, this is what we love to do. Like back from the day when I was working at the hydro store.
Yep.
We just love to talk about growing weed and our stories and stuff like that. So that's why I knew this when Caleb called. I was like, this is perfect. This isn't even like a stretch. This is just what we do every time we click the live. So, and I'll say this, that I hope that this is also a beginning of a friendship between us, Dominic and Caleb, and hopefully we'll be able to sit down together and smoke some sour diesel together or something.
All right. That sounds great. I can't wait.
All right. Cool. Goodbye,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks, Gaby.